going to call this meeting of the Planning Commission and Council to order. The clerk will note that all the council are present.
As far as planning and zoning, all the commissioners are present except for Commissioner Luther, who won't be attending, and Commissioner Ward is running a little late.
Okay. If you're here today for a short-term rental, I've asked staff to delay that meeting until I'm out of office. Let me share with you how this is going to go today. We're only here till 3. We cannot stay longer than that. So if you do wish to make comments, you might want to be succinct about it. We do have some presentations by staff, then there will be a short recess, and then we'll take public comment after that. Let's go ahead and begin with Renata McLeod is our first presenter. Renata, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, we're here again today to talk about the short-term rental code. And I just wanted to do a little brief reminder that in 2017 in our staff report, we outlined the reason why we were bringing the short-term rental code forward. And I think it's still applicable today. So we talked about protecting the integrity of neighborhoods. We talked about allowing for certain performance standards so that folks could utilize their private property to gain revenue. So we were kind of trying to do that balance between two parties and two different ways of using the property. I think that's still applicable today. So we wanted to make a couple clarifications. We heard a little bit of feedback and lots of folks talk about all the taxes we collect. The local option tax isn't applicable to a city our size, so that's only for cities that are population of 10,000 or less in the state of Idaho. And we don't receive the occupancy tax. So those are things that just aren't applicable at a city level. So just as a reminder, permit fees are there to collect, intended to collect on what costs the city has in operating the program and processing the applications. So we don't add in a bunch of additional costs so that we get a big revenue source on these types of permits and licenses in the city. So as we go forward, our hope is really to have some dialogue between Planning Commission and City Council, kind of see where everybody's interest lies in our next step of doing more stakeholder engagement, public input, and developing codes going forward. We do have a permit that expires in March, so our hope is to have lots of dialogue and have something bringing forward by January. So I will turn it over to our legal counsel, Randy Adams, and he'll give you a little update on legally what we can do.
Thank you, Renata. The statute that's up on the screen is the only statute in the state of Idaho regarding these short-term rentals. I did have a question beforehand about HOAs. There is a new code that was passed in this last session that deals with rentals in HOAs, but that's not part of what we're talking about today. The Idaho Code 676539 was also passed in 2017, shortly before the city passed its short-term rental regulations. This code, and it's shown in its entirety, says that no regulation passed by a city or county can have the express or practical effect of prohibiting short-term rentals in their entirety. However, cities and counties can pass regulations to safeguard the public health, to protect safety and general welfare, and also in order to protect the integrity of residential neighborhoods. None of those terms have been defined. There has been no appellate court case on this code section in the 5+ years that it has been in effect. The statute also provides that all short-term rentals are classified as residential land use for zoning purposes. very specific. It doesn't talk about building, fire, or the like. The statement of purpose for House Bill 216, which resulted in 6539, says the legislation protects property owners by allowing local governments to regulate short-term rentals only in cases where it is in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare. One of the sponsors of the bill testified before committee saying that cities and counties may implement reasonable regulations to safeguard residential neighborhoods where short-term rentals operate. This protects the private property rights of all the neighbors of rental properties. Another witness before the committee said that an ordinance that has a higher standard for something that already exists cannot be enhanced for short-term rentals. She said that what we wanted to say was that everybody abides by the same rules, but she recognized that there are some other things that cities do with respect to rental property that don't apply to those who do not rent their property. She said it is merely intended that if there's something on the books already, you have to make sure everybody has a level playing field in the residential arena. So in summary, the law is not intended to prevent a city from enacting new regulations that affect short-term rentals, even if they don't affect other residential properties. However, if a city has an existing ordinance, and those are the examples given were a noise ordinance or parking ordinance that are applicable citywide, you can't enhance those, you can't make those anything extra for short-term rentals by themselves. In addition, the city has the ability to enact new ordinances, putting new restrictions, but they have to have a rational relationship to the purposes of safeguarding the public health, protecting the health and welfare, and protecting the integrity of neighborhoods. It is important to note that each proposed regulation is going to have to be looked at individually to determine if it meets these purposes. And a lot will depend on how it is worded. So I think today we're looking for general principles, and we will attempt to word any regulations council and commission are interested in a way that would meet the intent and purpose of the statute. With that, I will turn it over to the next presenter, unless there are any questions.
Well, staff was asked by City Council to evaluate our current short-term rental ordinance, and so we are here today to discuss possible approaches to finding balance between the short-term rental interests and neighborhood interests. As you saw in the white paper, it outlines some primary goals and secondary goals of the short-term code amendment. Excuse me. So first off is to protect and reinstate neighborhood integrity in heavily impacted neighborhoods, preserve a sense of community for residents, to mitigate a variety of issues that are commonly associated with short-term rentals, mitigate illegal short-term rentals, and propose a code that is in compliance with our state statutes, as Randy mentioned. Secondarily, some other goals and benefits are allowing more opportunity for long-term rentals and home ownership by opening up more housing units for locals. So just wanted to kind of remind City Council and Planning Commission as we go into this workshop today, you're going to hear a variety of arguments on both sides. And so we're asking you to focus on protecting public good and neighborhood integrity and finding that balance. Also, kind of helpful as kind of a framework is a definition of neighborhood from National Geographic. A neighborhood is an area where people live and interact with one another. Neighborhoods tend to have their own identity or feel based on the people who live there and the places nearby. Residents may have similar types of families, incomes, and education levels. Neighborhoods can include restaurants, bookstores, parks. So a little bit about the stats, kind of what we're looking at right now. We have 22,000 residential units approximately in the city. Our population is 55,000. And our latest count of short-term rental permits is 453 for the year. 3.9% of our housing stock is being used as short-term rentals, and that's just the legal ones. I'm sorry, no, that's based on all the ones we're estimated, 864 total unique STR unit estimate. And 5.5% of our housing stock in neighborhoods south of I-90 have short-term rental permits. So we have some high numbers and a lot of concentration. I'll show you on the next few slides, but we have a few blocks that have 40 to 50% of the homes are operating as short-term rentals, and that's just the permitted ones. So we have higher numbers that is causing concern and is resulting in issues with neighborhood integrity. Just for kind of a definition, a standard city block in our older neighborhoods is 300 feet. And so as we'll kind of talk about, that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of some of these metrics. And about 10 to 14 homes are typically within a 300-foot block. So we have some information from Granicus, which is also operating as host compliance. We had a meeting with them last week and they shared information with us. So there are about 1,100 total listings. They determine there's 864 unique listings. So again, comparing that to 453 permitted, the others are not permitted. You can see on this map, they're scattered about, but the highest concentrations are definitely south of I-90. So you can see that here. And the numbers have been growing. So this shows 140% growth since 2016 in the city of Coeur d'Alene. That's before we started our short-term rental ordinance. So in 2017, we adopted the code, and our first baseline number for permits was 131, so we have grown significantly. This slide kind of talks about that concentration a little bit more. This map just shows dots of permitted short-term rentals. And so the concentration is really an issue with neighborhood integrity, community character, and pushing some local residents out of the neighborhoods because the high percentage on some of the blocks and in some of the neighborhoods of short-term rentals.
Good question. Is the purple line where that?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Is that Harrison?
It is. So what we did on this map, and I'll click on this and zoom into an actual city map that our Nick and GIS helped us do to kind of evaluate like certain areas. Now these aren't all defined neighborhoods. Some of them are, because we know defined boundaries for grounds. We know garden district boundaries and self-defined. This is Sanders Beach, East Mullen area. This we combine Midtown and North Downtown. This we call kind of the East Sherman area, so it's east of Garden District, east of 11th. And then this we call Garden District North Bryan, just because Bryan Elementary. And then yes, this is the dividing line of Harrison. South of I-90, we have the Health Corridor, we have the Riverstone Belle Reve area, and then that's kind of all we analyzed for just this portion. Oh, at Riverstone, we have that in another one, so I'll click on this map. Turn on some of these layers if you want to just quickly dive in. We included Mill River as well. There aren't any short-term rentals there. I think the CCNRs restrict that, so that one has 0 for the data. We did do this. So these are those areas I just described. And then the layer here to turn on the permits. So you can see in some of these areas we have high concentrations, and on the next slide I'll go into that a little more, but there are areas where you have 6 and straddling 2 blocks. That's very common. There's that. We have, 4 right here. They're all kind of stacked up together. We have 5 right here. So these are areas that are heavily impacted.
It's a Hillary.
What's that?
Are these layers available, like on our mapping site of our city website?
Currently, this with this neighborhood outline is not, no. The city website, we do have on that, if you go to the homepage and the short-term rental tab on the bottom, I think that can get you to the mapping, and then we also have under city residents, there's a drop-down tab, you can see all the short-term rental permits in the city.
These are the permitted ones.
These are permitted only, so we don't have, because we haven't yet entered into a contract with the compliance company, we don't have the unpermitted ones combined with them, so these are just the ones with permits. We can come back to that as we need to. So concentration levels, as I mentioned, there are some neighborhoods that are very impacted. Well, 11% of the entire Fort Grounds neighborhood is operating short-term rentals. So while you look at the permits, it looks low, 16 permits, but 144 total homes, the percentage is 11%. And then on some of the blocks, there's 21% of the homes are operating as a short-term rental. Some other neighborhoods that are severely impacted, the downtown north, Midtown has 9% of the whole neighborhood. Garden District and Sanders Beach, East Moline both have 8%. And then as you can see, these that are highlighted, max per block, Garden District and Sanders are both in that 45%, potentially 50% of homes on a single block are short-term rentals. So there is an impact to our neighborhoods. And that's one of the things we want to be addressed with a possible code amendment. I'm going to hand it over to Sean to walk through the next few slides.
Well, Sean's coming up there. I neglected to say that no decision will be made today. And also, if you don't get an opportunity to testify today, because the Planning Commission will continue reviewing this and the council, there will be further opportunities down the road as well. I apologize, I forgot to share that.
All right, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Hillary. So as Hillary has stated, that staff was asked by City Council to take a deeper look at the short-term rental code. And to do that, we were asked to look both internally and externally and report on what we found. To do that, we need to rewind for a moment and talk for a second about what we had done in 2017, 16, and 17 while we were putting this together. As staff received a lot of input from City Council, from Planning Commission, as well as the public, to have a light touch on this thing because we have never done this before. Let's understand what the market is doing. We can come back in a few years and readdress this and take a look at the data that we have. And that's what we are doing today, is revisiting this information. So we have identified in our current code what works well and what needs some improvement here. So the Good Neighbor Policy, for those that do not know, it's a trifold pamphlet that basically describes to people, it's provided in every short-term rental to behave while you're here. There's a notification to neighbors. This is, neighbors are notified all the way around, kind of like a donut around the donut hole, as to the intent of the individual to use that as a short-term rental and their contact information. We have a site plan and a floor plan for safety, responsible party requirements. So this is as part of that notification, it provides information to a responsible party, someone to call in case there's a disruption or other disorderly conduct in an attempt to have the owner or the responsible party deal with that rather than it go up the flagpole to our police department. And we also defined the violations and what they are pretty well in our code. So there are some improvements to this as staff sees, as Hillary had discussed, there is a concentration of short-term rentals. The compliance with advertisements has been difficult. State code says that we're not allowed to regulate the advertising agencies themselves, although we can have the owners provide that. It's been difficult. Our code compliance officer had tried to reach out to individuals on these different platforms to tell them to please include their permit number, and they were subsequently booted off those platforms for doing that, so it's been difficult. So enforcement of the regulations has been difficult because the tools, the city does not have the tools and the software, the technology, or the number of employees it would take to regulate this internally. There is not a 24/7 hotline that exists. That is something a compliance company can provide. Thus, the responsible party is the first contact, and there's no way for the city to track this in its current form. So it's difficult when looking at complaints to know how many complaints there actually are, because we designed this to hopefully not interrupt police as much as possible. So there's a gap there in the data. So other cities have looked at codes, and each city has its own flavor. I guess that's probably the way to put that. There's no secret sauce or perfect codes. Otherwise, many cities would be employing it. That doesn't exist. We were not able to find a specific code that ran across the board for a number of cities. So we talked to a bunch of cities about this, and they are looking at altering their codes as well, a number of them. So even though they have something on the books that may not be working for them very well, so there are changes constantly happening. So this is why staff put together the pick list just a few months ago, and that was distributed to all of our decision makers on what options that cities use. So as far as local housing research goes, we have some information on our books. In 2007, BBC Consulting, which they provided an analysis of impediments to fair housing. This is required by community development block grants through HUD, and they require that cities perform this on a regular basis. And in 2007, they wanted the city to focus on low-income needs. There was a change in 2011. They defined what percentage of the city households rent their house in contrast to how many own them. And then in 2015, they updated that to 41% renters and 59% owners. So in 2021, the University of Idaho provided a housing needs assessment. That was a study that was done and provided to the city, as well as provided to everyone in the city. So 54% of home buyers are non-residents, and those consist of retirees, second homes, and income investment properties. As part of that, they provided this definition. I didn't want to put it up here because it's a little bit verbose, but I'll read it into the record. The converting of residences to short-term rentals effectively reduces housing inventory. There are 228 legal permits for STRs in the city of Coeur d'Alene, and more than half are held by out-of-state owners. The number of vacation rental units advertised is estimated to be about 645, though only about 35% have permits. They cite where they got that information from. Extrapolating across the county, the total number of short-term rentals could exceed 1,000 units. Short-term rentals can be controversial. They facilitate the tourism industry, but reduce the housing stock available to residents. There are clear trade-offs. Last but not least, in 2022, there was a rental housing survey that provided data that 5,536 rental units in Kootenai County with a 1% vacancy rate. So that rate is very low. And renters are paying approximately 51% of their income in rent. But on the financial side of things, as far as permits go, the data is right here, based on a total of 864. That is estimated to be, because of unique advertisements, 411 of those are currently unpermitted, which is $117,000 plus in fees that were not paid this year. So the next year, assuming that there would be changes to the code, that any additional costs would be, by a third party, would be part of the cost of the program. So short-term rentals must pay for the program and the codes that are in place that were passed by City Council. Moving on to staff recommendations, we would like City Council to consider a buffer zone or proximity restriction, possibly 300 feet. When we were doing our research, this seemed to come up quite a bit. We saw as low as about 150 feet all the way up to about 500 feet is where that range was. 300 feet seemed to be the most used. Also, a cap on total permits is something that you can consider, and these two bullet points aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. They can be used together. If there is a total cap that you could due proximity up to a certain point where there would be a total cap. So considering time frame, permits we suggest would run from 1 to 3 years, with 3 recommended as the max. And this allows the stock and short-term rental market to turn over and provides fairness to people who may want to provide this to people in our community. I would say that this one is somewhat considered in our current code. It's not so much a specific time frame, but we did, staff design this purposefully, is that the permit would run with the owner and not the property, and that it would last 1 year in duration. And so if the owner moves, that permit has to be applied for by the new owner, and it is good for them. So we'd also suggest a waiting list, and this provides order so that there's a way to help staff determine who would qualify for a permit at any given time. So I just mentioned this, the current policy has the permit expire with the sale of the property, and at 1 year they have to renew it. Also to provide liability insurance of a certain specific dollar amount. Right here it says $1 million. This provides protection to the owner, short-term rental, renter, and as well as the owner.
That's a question.
Yes?
For a frame of reference on that 300-foot buffer, isn't like in the old part of downtown, isn't that about what one city block runs, 300 feet or?
Generally, yes, that is your typical city block.
Yeah.
It's 50 foot wide, 150 foot deep, and there's usually 6 of them in a row. And then there's an alleyway sometimes that run in between, generally about
Right.
15.
But kind of facing the street, that's about 1 block's worth. Okay.
Correct. So we do also recommend a minimum of a 2-night stay. Staff brought this up before we passed the one in 2017 to hopefully help cut down on the bachelor style parties, etc. So remove the 14-day exemption. This is it's practically impossible for staff to track that. This was lovingly referred to at the time as the Ironman exemption. So we'd also have you consider to have an on-site inspection for fire safety, building code, and the occupancy. This is a safety concern. Both long and short-term rentals, when they pull a permit for improvements, long-term rentals. This is something that we heard through a number of the letters that we received, is that long-term rentals aren't required to have inspections. Well, they are, but when they pull a building permit. So for short-term rentals, when they pull a short-term rental permit, staff would suggest at that point there would be an inspection. So the violation of civil penalty, possible misdemeanor, we wanted to place everything on the plate that could be available to be discussed. So we're looking for guidance on enforcement and penalties. So an increase to violations for short-term owners based on the type of violation. So for noise and parking, be $1,000 for a first offense, $2,000 for second, $3,000 for a third. If you're operating without a permit, that'd be a $3,000 violation. If you get caught a second time or more, it'd be $5,000. And then violations for the owners and property managers who do not advertise, we would request that be subject to fines as well. And then to consider misdemeanor citations and what is the appropriate penalty for that. Okay, so moving on to host-compliance agencies. And so as I mentioned earlier, staff does not have the people power or the technology to perform this job. There's a number of agencies now who have grown up, that have sprouted up because of this and how difficult it is to track. From what we've seen, that there's about 19 major ad places that provide ads for short-term rentals. That would be very, very difficult for us to track those, and over 40, including the smaller boutique and the smaller rental sites. So they offer a number of different things to cities. Ongoing property and owner identification. This is probably the hardest one for staff to follow, and that is because they come on the market, they come off the market, it's constantly checking it, and so these companies have artificial intelligence that goes out and grabs and scrapes all these sites and pulls back that information. At that point, they are reviewed by humans because they're not always accurate, and so they try to get over 90% accuracy is what they shoot for. So notification letters can be mailed out by these companies. Documentation is also provided, so the ads are screen captured, so all of that data and location information is captured and provided to the city. They issue violation letters as needed, and they also provide that hotline. One of the things that they do provide as well is the issuance of the permits and the collections of the funds to pay for those permits as well. That is something like the Planning Commission and City Council to consider. That would help free up some staff time in conjunction with monitoring the marketplace. So there are some options here, and I had mentioned a number of these, is to look at distance and the distribution based upon how concentrated that this use is. Also look at a cap, a maximum number. Like I said, those are not mutually exclusive or don't have to be. And then set some occupancy standards currently that is based on the definition of family, which I'll cover in a moment. And that is, so what we're suggesting is basing that on the home's attributes, and which is another reason to inspect for safety. One of the things that short-term rentals strive for is more occupancy, and so the more bedrooms that they can provide, the higher cost generally to stay there is, and so it would be good to truth check those in conjunction with any ads that they provide. So our current definition of occupancy, and I will not read all of this, but it's subject to say that the definition of single family and what that occupancy is currently you can have 4 unrelated people living together, 5 related and unrelated, or no limit if they are by blood, marriage, or adoption. And so this is an example from another city and how they deal with occupancy in a short-term rental, which is by number of bedrooms and what those standards are for that city. And staff would suggest applying this type of occupancy in any change that is contemplated. It helps staff as well as a compliance organization determine what the level of occupancy should be by any given month. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Hillary to take the next few slides. Thank you. Is there any questions before we move on? Yes.
Sean, I have a question on, I think Renata said when we started this, that the state of Idaho does not allow for a city our size to have a hotel, motel kind of tax. I'm curious, you had a slide that said, areas that need improvement, and one area is enforcement of short-term regulations. My question is whether the fees that we're allowed to collect, is that just a processing fee, an admin fee, notwithstanding a hotel motel tax, can those fees maybe increased if necessary to hire some support and help in the enforcement arena?
Yes, they absolutely can.
Thank you.
It's a Sean.
Yes.
But on the, I'm curious, because one of the areas that at least I think is important and we are charged with is the safety, life safety, fire, those kinds of things. It seems like clearly we both have, you know, we're allowed to do something with that, and I think we're responsible to do something. Or like bed and breakfasts, which are kind of a similar cousin, different in some way, but do they have inspections for like fire and things when they first get going? Or anything on an annual basis?
If they have to pull a permit, then they do. Most bed and breakfasts, according to our code, are required to get a special use permit. And so that special use permit allows, it's a public meeting that goes to Planning Commission. And Planning Commission determines whether or not they can operate in the location that they are. They wouldn't necessarily need a permit unless they were making improvements at that time. Then they would pull a building permit and there would be associated inspections. Yes.
You glossed over one from the original documentation, one permit per owner, business group of owners.
Did I miss one?
Yeah, you skipped it, but I thought maybe
Okay.
you deleted it.
No, that's a very good point.
That's a big one.
Nope. So staff is suggesting to provide the opportunity across the board to the most people that could benefit from running one of these, that there would be one owner or one short-term
Ownership.
rental per owner. Right.
So broaden the base rather than having it just a pyramid of landholders holding 4 or 6
Perfect.
units. Okay.
Good, thank you for catching that.
Okay.
Thank you, Ellen.
All right, so we'll walk through a couple slides where we're looking for some feedback. Obviously, there's no decision being made today, but we would like some discussion and just kind of a sense of, you know, how the commission and the city council feel about some of these items. So this first slide, how do we issue permits? So like to hear a little bit about, should it be first come, first served? Should it be lottery? Should it be a lottery with a point system? The cap on the permits, as Sean mentioned, they're not mutually exclusive, so it could be beneficial to have a cap on permits plus have this other lottery and point system, or however you'd like to look at that, or could be a cap per neighborhood. That one gets a little more complicated because you have to figure out the exact neighborhood boundaries, but that is a way to do it as well. And the waiting list, as we mentioned, provides kind of fair opportunity if there is that cap or buffer system. The occupancy standard, as Sean mentioned, like some guidance on that, if you like definition of family, or if we should be more specific. And then the length of permits and minimum stay. Those are important to find out about. And then the proof of liability insurance, if that's an item that's supported. How to handle the violations. From previous discussions, it sounds like there is interest in increasing those fees and as well as enforcement. It's really critical. The on-site inspection, as Sean mentioned, that's something that staff feels is really important, and most communities have that, at least for the first year. And then renewals, not necessarily, that might be a self-inspection with photos that could provide that information, or if there's a change to the structure, if the permit shows now they have 4 bedrooms, that would trigger an inspection. The limit of the one short-term rental permit to owner or owner group or business is mentioned, and then the levels of service for the short-term rental compliance companies. And then lastly, removing that 14-day exemption. So those are the items. We'll go back to these slides, just kind of wanted to walk through that quickly. Next steps, just so you kind of see and so the community can see what's happening next, we're continuing to accept public comments. Obviously today, the website has been updated and it has the email for the planning department, so we receive those, we will forward those all out. That way we can make sure all the emails are coming into the same groups. And then we're posting, excuse me, those comments on our website. And then we'll, excuse me, allergies. The Planning Commission will have the public hearing, and then council also will have additional opportunity. Thank you for public comments. We will be meeting with the Board of Realtors. We've reached out to schedule a meeting with some of their board members that are focused on this topic. And we've also been invited to participate in a brown bag session in November with the realtors on this. We would also like to proceed with hiring a third party, the short-term rental compliance company, to assist us with figuring out how many short-term rentals are in the city. Those numbers we showed you, that's just kind of their, at a glance, they haven't done the analytics. So that's really critical for us to figure out how many do we have, figure out the maps, the locations, so that we can begin the enforcement no matter how the code moves forward. And then also just to determine what code amendments we'd like to see. Those would then go to Planning Commission and City Council for final adoption. So we have an opportunity now for the City Council and Planning Commission to ask staff any questions and have a little discussion before that 5-minute recess. And then on the agenda, you see there's the recess followed by public comments. It'll be 3 minutes per person for the public comments to keep us on track, and then discussion again, and then staff Renata will come up at the end and kind of summarize what we think we've heard, just make sure that we have an understanding of that. Yes?
I have a question for, and probably Randy would be the best one to
Okay.
answer this.
I'll let Randy come on up.
The feedback is on limiting 1 STR per owner group and business. Is that regulating ownership?
It is regulating ownership, but it is not prohibiting STRs.
Okay, so we can't, I mean, we can regulate based on land use, but then aren't we just regulating on ownership, and I thought we couldn't do that?
I have not seen any case law on that particular point. It does not seem to be a violation of the plain language of 676539.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Christine?
Thank you, Randy.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, are you doing this? I'm sorry, go.
Randy, I've been a little bit concerned about the misdemeanor charge, and so I wondered, I understand it, but has there been some consideration of first offense, second offense, then you reach the misdemeanor?
Yes, there is, that is one of the suggestions, is that the first, maybe the first and second offenses are civil penalties. It would be multiple offenses before you get to a misdemeanor. And the city has a number of ordinances that carry with them a misdemeanor penalty.
I have a tie-in to that. We're comparing the short-term rental to a long-term rental. Have we seen a profound jump with the short-term rentals of that adherence or breaking the law or sound ordinances or, crime? Have we seen any kind of change in that from someone who's there for a year and someone who's partying down for 2 days? Have we seen that profound call-outs to the police and to fire and life safety folks?
I think somebody else might have more information than I do on that.
Answer that.
I do know that the police are called out. I'm not sure that we have that detail.
Yeah, I'd love to know if there
of the
was
calls.
a real obvious shift in what has occurred. I mean, I've heard about this, through things, but I want the real facts on,
Right.
have we seen a change?
I will leave it up to who in the staff knows. Probably Renata.
Maybe Renata.
All right. The one thing we've kind of run into is that the abutting property owners have the responsible party's phone number. So sometimes they'll reach out to that responsible party first. Other times they don't feel comfortable calling in 911 for a short-term 1-hour party or whatever. And so we hear stories, but they didn't call in or they called the responsible party, so we don't have the statistics on that. So it's just not no definitive line.
It's just rumblings.
Yeah, we have received complaints of unpermitted, and we have made contact with them, and every single one of them's come in once we made contact and became legal.
Thank you.
Mr. Mann?
I just had one, and this might have been a question for Hillary on, did you give us an example of what this point system might look like?
Or we did in that white paper, and maybe I should grab that note, but yeah, we had talked about.
Is the white paper online?
It is, it's part of the packet. So that was attached and we gave examples. So let's see, if somebody has been a short-term rental permit holder since the very beginning, if somebody is the responsible party, also owns the property, if there's off-street parking, if, there've been no violations, types were some of the ones that were.
Sure that was low
Yeah.
accessible and hadn't changed.
Right, no, so those are ones, but anything could kind of be added into that pot, I believe. And then I think the on-site manager was another one we were considering. Thank you.
Hillary, got a question. On the existing legal permit, depending on whenever this change might come about, how is that going to affect any permits at the time a change comes that is permitted, whether it's 300 feet enforcement or things like that? Are those permitted ones at that time going to be changed, affected, or if they're all voided and we start over again?
Right, so the permits are only good for 1 year now. All permits are renewed in March, so everything would start over.
Okay.
If there's a new code, we'd like to have that in place so that whenever the new permit applications are due, it starts then. And so the thought was if there was kind of that lottery system and kind of the buffering, that we get all the applications in by a certain deadline, and then that takes place. So then we can kind of do the randomization or the point system, and then the lottery based on that.
So our charge is try to have everything done by prior to March?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Dan?
What is the basis for the $1,000 fine for the first offense of noise? That just, I guess my first layman's take is that seems kind of dramatic. I don't know if that's kind of fine we give to people with mufflers on Sherman or something. Now the parking is, and I guess what I'm interpreting with parking is that if we put in this, that for X amount of bedrooms, you've got to have 2 spaces or 3 spaces. I mean, that's a very known thing. And if they openly defy that, no, we're not putting in parking, then yeah, I can see where you got to have some. But I'm wondering on the noise, I guess, what is that based on? And it just, obviously, you're getting my feedback is that, you know, I've got some real, I guess, kind of concern or question about that high of a penalty for noise. But
And I don't know if Randy or Renata want to answer this one specifically, but I think the thought is, right now, the violation fees are really low, and we haven't done a lot of enforcement. I think that's just kind of multi-part, and a lot of people aren't calling in complaints, but really want to have high performance of people, and if there is truly a noise violation, then you kind of look at our noise ordinance and kind of the language of that. If it's in reasonable nature that somebody is excessively making noise, then have some fines just so we can start getting better compliance. And then if we had kind of that cap, there would be waiting list, so then someone else would be eligible if they kind of made it through the 2 or 3 strikes. Permits revoked. But, yeah,
and I guess
like
my
Randy's coming in for
feedback too
noise.
is that, you know, if somebody's really having a loud party or something, we don't have to wait for, you know, they're not gonna wanna wait for, gee, we're gonna, you know, the vacation rental police are gonna, call the real police, and they'll do something that night and deal with it. Anyway, just, you can say I got some question marks around that area. So.
The city already has a noise ordinance, and it is a misdemeanor to violate that ordinance. So
Okay.
it's not really changing anything for that particular issue.
Okay.
What's the fine?
What's the
It's a maximum, it's obviously up to the court, but it's a maximum of $1,000 and/or up to 180 days in jail. It's again up to the discretion of the court.
John?
I just wanted to add a little something more to that. Our hope is to have that host compliance agency hired on, and they would have the 24-hour hotline with a live body. And so they would receive that first call if it was a noise violation, there's a current party going on. Their workflow would suggest their next step would be to call in law enforcement. There'd be a report taken, and we'd have evidence of actual violations before any fines would be assessed. So if it's just, 5 days later, somebody's saying, hey, it was really noisy the other day, well, we wouldn't have the evidence set forth to be able to do any violations. But that would be our envisionment, is we would have documentation.
John?
Thank you, Mayor. Question for Hillary. I'm sorry. So a planning and zoning guy, my mind is kind of on zoning, and we get our planning magazine, our fall edition, and when we started studying, there happens to be a little story in here about 4 tips for short-term rentals, and I started digging around what other cities are doing and whatnot. Question for you is, has there been any thought of approaching this looking at zone? For example, some cities, Austin and some others, they look at short-term rentals a little differently if they're, say, in a commercial zone. And so if you have a row of condos along Sherman, East Sherman, somewhere or whatever, that's in a commercial zone or out in Riverstone or wherever, maybe there's a different expectation, of, I live in a condo in a commercial zone. I'm kind of more, open to, people kind of coming and going, as opposed to living out in suburbia, where I want my kid to have, you know, some friends, you know, that live there and whatnot. Is any thought of, you know, having kind of different tiers, if you will, or looking at it based on zoning?
We did consider that. We looked at other communities that have done that. There's quite a few different approaches. We had talked about that initially, that maybe the commercial areas shouldn't have the same limitations, but then if you look at a lot of commercial areas, they're immediately backed by single-family residential. So we were looking at even on Sherman Avenue, the Sherman 5 kind of townhouses. So there's single-family homes just on the north of the alley, and there's 5 right there. So on the south side and on the north side. So that one block has 40% of the homes are short-term rentals. And so if you just look at it strictly based on the zoning, you might have some additional implications. Riverstone, I was looking at the condo buildings, and I don't have the exact number of the commercial units, but there's approximately 19% of the Riverstone condos are short-term rentals. So, you know, that has an impact if somebody is living there as kind of their year-round residence, then again, you just have a higher percentage. But yes, there's certainly ways to look at it kind of based on locations or zoning or a combination of the two.
I need to point out that the Idaho statute's probably much different than Texas or other ones where it specifically says that a short-term rental is considered residential use for all zoning purposes. So it doesn't matter what zone it's in, it would be considered residential.
That's helpful, thanks.
Other questions?
I have a question on the 14-day. So is that mostly because it'll be hard to enforce the 14 days? Because I know that, I mean, the Ironman exemption, or I think if you're in Georgia, it might be the master's exemption, but it's an IRS tax code that allows people to rent out their home and not pay tax on that income. But I'm wondering, you know, there is a need during Ironman and an event like that. And some people don't occupy, you know, they don't rent that out as a short-term rental all the time, but maybe just that 1 week a year. Would there be a way to accommodate those kind of rentals, or?
The tricky thing we've experienced so far is that I think there's some people that truly just do the 14 days and actually do it so it's consecutively. I think other people are doing way more than that, or claiming it's under the 14 days. And then the neighbors are like, there's a short-term rental that's being occupied that's not permitted. So it can cause some issues. The other thing is you can charge a pretty penny for those durations. So may as well get a permit and bring it into compliance with staff's thought on that one.
But if you limit permits and you're only doing 14
That's something to
days,
consider. If
yeah.
there was a cap and the kind of the buffering, then that might be an opportunity to do that too. And a compliance company can help if somebody did more than 14 days. That's possible that we could track that a little bit differently for compliance.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think minimum stay of 2 nights is negotiable. I mean, I know what the goal is for that, but I just don't know how you would do that. Because it would theoretically be possible for me and all my frat buddies to rent a house for 2 nights and just show up for 1.
Right. The difference with that, if I may, is just then you wouldn't have somebody in the next night because you would have blocked it out for 2. And the compliance companies do track that.
Yeah.
That's pretty common for them to look at that for their communities that they're working in, just to see how many are advertised, because it has to show on the website listing if it's 2-night minimum or what the minimum night stay is.
Okay. $1,000 fine for noise violation, yeah, I like that. These things make a lot of money, and you gotta have a deterrent. That's a good deterrent, and I would say that would be, keep them in line. The other thing I wanted to say, just for the good of the order, is that prior to 2017, these were illegal in the city. You couldn't have an STR. In fact, I was on council where we shut one down. And I didn't like that. I'm like, we have to deal with it, but the state intervened, and it is what it is today. But, you know, I don't think anyone up here just wants to ban them outright. But that's how we were up until 2017.
Other questions? Okay, yes.
Sorry. About occupancy, I understand for like pulling a permit to have a consistent with actual floor plan, but how do you enforce that? I mean, 2 bedrooms, 2 kids, you could have, you know, sets of cousins, you could have 8 people in a 2-bedroom because they're little cousins. Like what is the value really on how it's presented and advertised, or is there any enforcement that is practical or useful based on occupancy?
It's a combination, so it would definitely be how it's advertised and then how it's rented out. And oftentimes, the community will also then tie that to the number of parking spaces that are required, off-street parking spaces. So that's one way. And then if a neighbor, for example, saw what the listing was and was like, wow, they have like 20 people in there and max is 8 occupancy, then that could be called in as a violation. It is a little tricky, and that's why, before this, we've been using the definition of family, but then we know that that gets violated all the time.
And then, I guess I have another question. If you have a limit, and then how do you monitor people falling off? Like somebody stops using theirs, and people are waiting for that next spot. I mean, that seems challenging equally on the other side to enforce.
So, yeah, there's usually a waiting list through that methodology, and I guess, I don't know, if somebody called the city and said, hey, I don't want this anymore, then we could open it up. I don't know that someone would want to carry it out to the end of the year, or they might. Some communities, they've done that. So it's just kind of a matter of, I guess, fairness and getting into that lottery system and getting on the waiting list and hoping somebody either sells or moves or terminates the permit.
One more.
Go ahead.
For the one STR permit to owner approved for business, would that be one permit at a time or one permit in a certain area? So if you're a property owner and you have properties across the city, but is it per neighborhood defined, or is it at a time, or is
No.
it strictly one permit?
How staff was presenting it was one per owner or owner group or business, so that you can't have 6. Because especially if there is kind of a cap in the lottery system, just to make it so there's more of a fair opportunity for everyone to get a permit.
But I can have 6 if I just create multiple LLCs using.
Well, that's where the owner group is, so we'd be reviewing the owner group, the STR compliance company.
Other questions?
Do you know how many of your owners now that are permitted have more than one property?
Kelly might know that, I'm not sure. I know we have quite a few that have multiple.
Some people have 5 or 6.
We were looking at another issue and happened to look at a neighborhood, and there were 3 houses right in a row owned by the same company, all as short-term rentals.
Okay. We are going to take a 5-minute recess, and then we will begin taking public comments. There are a lot of people that signed up on the sheet, but did not say whether they wish to testify or not. If you didn't say yes, then I'm going to presume you didn't wish to testify, you just wanted to let it be known whether you are in favor. Really, there's nothing to be in favor of or opposed to.
We didn't, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, we didn't realize that we had to say that we were going to testify. We put, if we
Well,
were,
it says right there, do you wish to testify?
many of us are here to
Mr.
testify.
Mayor, since this isn't a hearing, I would just personally want to hear from everyone who signed up.
Thank you. Thank you. We have till 3, right?
Yes, I did.
So how many people didn't say yes or no, but wish to testify? All right, I'm going to go through the names. If you want to testify, go to the microphone. Oh, and I'm supposed to read this. For those wishing to give public comment, there is a microphone set up right there. When your name is called, please step so that your toes are on the tape line. And do not touch the microphone. It is set where it needs to be, and all hell and brimstone will come forth if you touch the microphone. Beware. All right. Let's have some fun. Melissa Radford.
I'm going to read it. I'm really nervous, so Good afternoon.
Are your toes right?
They are online.
Just kidding.
I comply. My name is Melissa Radford, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak with you about the future direction of this beautiful city. My husband Jeremy and I met and got married in the middle of the pandemic, and one of the first things we discovered about each other after we met was that we both had visited Coeur d'Alene in the past and had a strong love for the city and the lake. We were blessed to be able to purchase a 1911 downtown bungalow that was practically a tear down and planned to use it as a place for us to vacation. We saved this beautiful home from being demolished and replaced with a house that may or may not have fit into the identity of the historic neighborhood. We gave it a solid foundation, kept the exterior the same as it has always been, and have completely rebuilt the inside of the house so it will stand strong for another 111 years. While working on our house, we fell even more in love with the beauty of the landscape and the kindness of the community. That's when we sold our home and moved to Coeur d'Alene full-time. Jeremy's a general contractor and I'm a neonatal nurse practitioner. Whoa, I'm shaking, sorry. Both jobs are extremely physically demanding, so we saw an opportunity to use our gifts with home improvement and hospitality as a new joint career and retirement plan with the short-term rental market here in Coeur d'Alene. We started the CDA Vacation Rental Alliance because we knew we weren't the only ones whose futures would be destroyed by the new proposals. Our group has 322 members and continues to grow. We want to share our mission statement with you. Our goal as the CDA Vacation Rental Alliance is helping our neighbors and the business owners in our community to receive a more accurate impression of the numerous positive impacts short-term rentals properties have here in Coeur d'Alene. We do this through community outreach that focuses our message on a balance between safety, neighbor engagement, and benefit to both the city and property owners. We will endeavor to show that we are pursuing our American dream to earn a living for our families in a way that we love and providing extraordinary hospitality to guests visiting our beautiful city. We trust that this community of Coeur d'Alene, once informed, to help safeguard our constitutionally protected right to rent in accordance with Idaho state law. So it's important to know what the law says before we move forward as a community to address concerns and effects of proposed changes to the current ordinance. We talked about all those reasons. So if the city wants to create or alter any regulations on the short-term rental market here in CDA, the burden of proof is on them to produce evidence that short-term rentals are a threat to the public health and welfare and to neighborhood integrity. We obtained a list of noise and disturbance complaints from the CDA PD from May of 2020 to August of 2022, which includes 3 summer seasons, as well as a list of the permitted short-term rental properties in Coeur d'Alene. Out of 1,122 total complaints, only 14 were associated with legally permitted vacation rentals. That's about 1% of the total. So there's some of that data you guys were looking for. We can't compare it to long-term, but we know that. So here's the things you'll hear from our group.
That's your 3 minutes.
Can I have one more? 30 seconds. Here's what you're going to hear from members of our group. Firstly, we support the ordinance as it is currently written, since it is focused on safety, making sure neighbors know who to contact if needed, and a good neighbor handout for guests. The current ordinance has not been enforced since its inception, so how will new and burdensome restrictions on the law-abiding short-term rentals create resolution of current neighbor concerns? Secondly, we will present a recommendation for a short-term rental commission modeled after the CDA Parking Commission as a point of contact where short-term rental issues and concerns can be identified and addressed. To provide a review of short-term rental ordinances with recommendations to the City Council and City Administrators for potential need for changes that comply with the Idaho state law and address the needs of both our local community and short-term rental owners. And also to provide consultation for enforcement of good neighbor policies, guide property owners in becoming compliant with permitting, help them improve vetting of guests, create effective house rules, and ensure neighbors have the ability to contact the owner and/or management company in a timely manner with concerns. We love this community and care deeply about its future. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a public meeting, and at public meetings, we are respectful and we do not clap. It's not a high school pep rally. Now, I want to point out something to you at this point, and what Melissa did was provide what she thought were good reasons for keeping what we have and some solutions to regulation. And that was exactly the kind of thing that we need to hear. If you agree with Melissa, rather than repeat that, please just let us know that you agree with that rather than repeat it. It's really not effective to repeat the same information over and over. Thank you. And we do have timers over here, and there are a lot of folks who want to share their thoughts. So if you are wanting to share your thoughts, you need to keep it to the 3 minutes, and I need to stop you at 3 minutes. Caleb David. And after Caleb is Ed Averallo.
Good afternoon. My name is Caleb David, and I am a realtor with Lakeshore Realty, just on the other side of Tubbs. Today, I'm going to slightly echo what Melissa said, so forgive me. But in situations like these and when we're discussing stuff like this, it's very easy for us to have a us versus them mentality. I want us to kind of disperse of any instruments of division. We're on the same team. We're all part of the Coeur d'Alene family. We want our STRs, we want our homes to be beneficial for the people that own the STRs and the people that live in the community. So as we approach the situation, let's not try to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not try to throw punches and do anything like that. We're on the same team. We're fighting for it. Let's keep it there. I visited Coeur d'Alene for the first time in 2017. I came up for an internship, and I just fell in love with it. Beautiful. The people were amazing. My parents didn't want me to come up here moving from down south, but I've experienced nothing but love from everybody up here. When I came up here, there was a lot of opportunity. I saw a lot of other tourists and came to realize that Coeur d'Alene was a tourist town. That's something that you cannot argue with. From the boat tours, the zip line tours, the souvenir shops on Sherman, the little mom and pop stores, like they're all supported by the ability for us to house people with our STRs. I don't own an STR, but I want to, so that's why I'm not here fighting the good fight. But that's all supported by the ability for STRs to be able to house people. And so let's look at the rules and regulations, the enforcements that we already have in place, and let's enforce those as opposed to adding new restrictions when there's not any enforcement going on. And there have been a couple good ideas about, a team or a group that could be sponsored or funded or paid to enforce those rules and regulations. And I think that would be the most viable solution right now. There's already guidelines, there's already things that, STRs need to be ran and to be permitted. Let's focus on those, let's enforce those, and let's not add new arbitrary rules that aren't going to be enforced, because that's not going to solve any problems, it's not going to solve anything.
Next will be Brett Lewis. If you're next, if you could come up so that you're ready to testify, that'd be great.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ed Arvell. My wife and I have been coming up to the Coeur d'Alene area for about 15 to 20 years, give or take, and I'm a retired law enforcement officer for 30 years. I was an investigator, a detective, and during the time that I worked in a very large city with a very large tourism base, I saw how STRs affected the community, affected a number of different things, the city ordinances and so on. I want to bring some of my experience up to bear as the owner now of a home. My wife and I purchased a home here a few years ago. We live here 50% of the time, travel back and forth. It's nice being retired to do that. And while we're not here, we tend to rent our house out. We're legally, lawfully permitted, and I was more than happy to follow all the regulations and instructions that the city gave me. Some of my issues that I'm seeing now that I have a problem with is the fact that a lot of vacation rental owners, we take pride in our community. We take pride in our neighbors. As a law enforcement officer, I never want to cause my neighbor problems. I don't want them to have to call on music, parking, or any other issues. So I run my business, that particular part of my life, the way like a business. So I make sure that I vet the guests. I make sure that I do a really good job in keeping in contact with my neighbors so they can call me anytime without a problem. Some of the laws or some of the proposed changes that are being discussed here and brought to you from the planning department are based on extrapolated and estimates of the city and the STRs. Law enforcement, we can't work that way. When you are working on a case or something, you have to have facts and you have to have good data. Like Melissa talked about, the 1% of the calls for service in a given period of time being STRs. I don't understand, if there's only 1% of the total call for disturbance calls, then why the heavy enforcement, the very large fines and the misdemeanor charges? Mr. Adams had spoken in the August 22nd meeting about the state law having not been challenged, and he was asked by council what that meant. He felt, and he mentioned in the meeting, that you guys could pretty much do what you like up until a point of the court tells you otherwise. Do we operate that way? Does council operate that way? Do we push the edge of the envelope like that with, something that may be a violation of a state law and or that is unreasonable and unethical? So when we talk about some of these laws and we talk about city council considering some of these proposed fines, misdemeanor charges, I would like planning on it and or the cities to provide the public with information on what other violations of ordinances come with that kind of heavy-handed discipline, whether they're misdemeanor charges anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your consideration.
Brett Lewis. Next is Steve Rudders.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. My name is Brett Lewis. I am a local real estate professional and a member of this community, and I'll say that proudly. As far as some of the statements made in past sessions as well as today, we've talked about affordability, and there's really three major aspects that mostly contribute to the factors. Supply and demand, we know about those issues, low interest rates that we've seen historically, and then location. Coeur d'Alene is a destination area. The secret's out. North Idaho is awesome. We looked at some data pulled from a local local title company, and permitted STRs are less than 3% of the total homes sold in Coeur d'Alene from January 1st, 2020 to September of this year. It's clear they do not contribute to the affordability issues stated by some of the council members in the past. As for economics, Coeur d'Alene depends on tourism for its economy. Without STRs, house cleaners, painters, other contractors, landscapers, property managers, photographers, local restaurants, gift shops, and many more would all see a huge cut in their annual revenue, not to mention the taxes paid for throughout all the goods and whatnot. In closing, short-term rentals positively contribute to our local economy, generating business and tax dollars, keeping families together under one roof. Isn't Idaho family-oriented? To be frank, Idaho's constitution declares Idaho as a right to rent state, which means the city council's propositions would be a complete breach of property owners' constitutional rights. Thank you for your time.
Steve Rudders.
Steve Peters.
Thank you.
Colonel USMC retired. You rock.
Next is Jeremy Bradford after Steve.
Thank you. Okay, what I got here, I'm going to talk about, I'm in the aviation business. I'm going to talk about power. The first thing I'll do is I'll do an example here of aircraft power. You have throttles that you push up for max power. Max power gives you max performance. You pull it all back to idle, you stall, the airplane goes in.
Please face the microphone.
Yes, sir. Anyway, we're talking about power and the implementation of power here. In aviation, everybody intuitively knows what that means. You pull it back, you run into trouble. Now we're going to talk about government power in the halls of the government and what they do. The distinguished panel is fully loaded with power. There's no question about that. You've been elected for that. We duly entrust you with that, and we're lucky to have you. But what we want to talk about here with this, in terms of the short-term rental, is we're looking for the sweet spot. In aviation, I want to set that amount of power that gives me just a sip on the fuel and max burn going down the road, right? So we're looking for max speed, max performance in a helicopter in the mountains, whatever it may be. Here, we have a solution. The Short-Term Vacation Rental Alliance, I'm going to jack up the name, Melissa, I apologize for that. By implementing an executive steering committee, what we can do is hold weekly, quarterly, whatever the council dictates, meetings to determine what's happening out there, out on the ground, out in the neighborhoods. Over here, right, and I've heard a light touch referred to. When that light touch, which is the situation we're in right now, voices are apparently going unheard. And there's folks out here, we're going to hear from them very soon, that have had serious problems
if you're having a problem with your family, and it's because of me owning a short-term rental, I want to know about it, because that's an infraction against all of us. So we take all of this very serious. What we say, instead of a light touch or a heavy hand, pull it back, set max cruise, and let's go for the right touch. That's what we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Radford.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Radford of the CDA Vacation Rental Alliance. Let's talk about the economic benefits that STRs bring to CDA. Here's an example of an actual one-bedroom, one-bathroom STR over a 2-year period. The house was occupied by 523 nights. For those, occupancy averaged about 2.2 people. Here's the money that businesses get to generate local jobs from the operation of this one tiny STR. Those expenses would be property management, and interior maintenance, cleaning, lawn and snow removal, tree trimming, and exterior maintenance. Furnishings, appliances, decorations, HVAC, electrical and plumbing. That house incurred $88,972. According to the average individual income, that supplies 3 jobs in this area. Now let's talk about tourist spending. According to the Idaho Tourism Commission, overnight visitors spend about $158. That's at restaurants, groceries, the tourist attractions, souvenirs, and shopping. For those 523 days, 2.25 people generate $185,927 in tourist spending. That's nearly 7 jobs generated. That's a total of $275,000 in local spending and 10 local jobs by a property that improves the aesthetics of neighborhood while being occupied less densely by the average long-term rental house. The big picture is, if you take the 400 plus or minus permitted STRs and multiply that, that's $110 million. $110 million spent in local spending, not profit for the owners, which would be more like less than 5% of that number. That's $110 million going directly to the community, funding 4,000 local jobs. I respectfully submit that the council consider those thousands of local jobs and the local residents you represent who feed their families with those jobs as you determined their path forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela King, and then Terry Fetland.
Hello, I'm Angela King, broker and owner of King Realty. I am also a short-term rental owner, and I am here today for your consideration to form a short-term rental commission for the city of Coeur d'Alene. As a member of this community, I rely on short-term rentals to supplement my income. If we implement this short-term rental commission, it would consist of members appointed by the mayor. The mission is to provide a safe place for people of Coeur d'Alene to be heard and encourage a healthy business relationship with the city. I'm super excited to present you 3 reasons why I think short-term rental commission can truly benefit our community. Reason number 1, it provides a safe place for complaints. I have noticed that being in real estate for over 30 years, people want to be heard. I built my brokerage on listening and actively serving the community. If there's ever an issue, there's too many cars in the driveway, I want to know. If the music is too loud, the commission wants to know. If there's people swearing or offending my neighbors, I want to know that as well. I want them to know that the short-term rental commission is listening and that they care. This commission will have an email and a phone number, like a direct hotline. This is going to be a solution to all of our problems. Not only are you heard, but the issues will be enforced. Which brings me to number 2. It is an important part of our economic community. Alone, the summer alone, the resort was fully booked. All summer you couldn't get a room. And if there's no room at any of the inns, where will everyone stay? And I get it. I don't want a bunch of people here. I know it already takes 20 minutes to get to work on 95. Traffic is a bear. However, it is such an important part of our community. What happens when the restaurants shut down? They will be impacted. Entertainment, our mom and pop boutiques, they will be affected. Our real estate market will suffer. And those who rely on short-term rental as their only source of income, they too will suffer. Which brings me to my third and final point. I want to address who is going to pay for this. Who is going to fund this? I know what we're all thinking. This is great. We have a sounding board, we have a huge committee, it's going to benefit our economy, but who's going to pay for it? The Short-Term Rental Commission, which is funded not by tax dollars, but entirely by the vacation rental registration permit fees. The permit fee, excuse me, is even if you have an existing STR, all current and future STR owners will apply for and obtain a permit along with a set of rules. The expectation will be set. You only get 2 people per bedroom, 1 person per car. All right, thank you.
Terry, and next is Holly Hansen. Terry, when I see an F and a J, I'm never sure which way to pronounce it.
It's Fietland.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Terry Fietland, and I am a permitted, compliant, and passionate STR owner. I reached out to Sandpoint, their planning department, to understand what STR revisions were made almost 4 years ago, back in June 2018, which will be included in information that you get. Not right now, obviously, but it's coming in a packet of information. It's not appropriate to incorporate Sandpoint's revisions as they don't consider themselves as a tourist resort community. We in Coeur d'Alene are. Also, after speaking to a downtown core business owner, there still is a housing supply issue for those individuals working downtown. And that's after making changes almost 4 years ago. Unless there is data that confirms what Sandpoint is doing is working, we as a resort community, we need to do our own due diligence, look at the data we have, not make guesses, not do extrapolated data, look at the data that we have before we make changes that's going to impact this community, Coeur d'Alene's economy. And we need to enforce the violations to those that are not compliant. The last meeting in September, the number was 381 permitted, and now it's over 400. That's a 72 permit increase. People want to be compliant. And we also want to run this legally, and we want to be a part of the solution. We as an alliance want to be a part of the solution. We don't want anything bad to this economy and this community to take place. We're passionate, we care about our properties, and the people that come and stay at our properties love the area. So we want to be a part of the solution. We want to be a committee that is working as a volunteer-based committee and be a part of what's enforced versus this hard-handed, suggested options that we're hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Holly Hansen, and next is Courtney Tritton.
Hi, my name is Holly Hansen. I am a community house owner. I own a couple of vacation homes. I'm also a realtor with Windermere, and I have a lot of clients. I represent a lot of clients who have become friends that are short-term rental owners. And I'm also fourth-generation Idaho. So as a few of my other owners, we have several vacation homes and short-term rentals downtown. And we care about our community, and I'm very involved in them. And I agree with everything that's been said, and I'm not going to repeat it, but I'm just going to point out one thing. let's talk about if it weren't short-term rentals, what would it be? Okay, so if we're gonna say we're gonna limit one to every block, or we're gonna reduce the number per block, what will those become? Okay, well, first of all, some of them are already short-term rentals, so what are those people gonna do? They've already dropped $100,000 into renovating this beautiful home into a short-term rental, and now they don't have it for income. What are they gonna do? They're gonna move into it? No. They're gonna make it a short-term rental, a long-term rental. Do we have any restrictions on those? So the neighbor that's living next door to the short-term rental that have noise complaints and parking complaints are now gonna live next to a long-term rental. And if anybody's lived next to a long-term rental, it's not as nice as living next to a short-term rental, because the lawn is not kept up, they have friends over, they party, and unfortunately in the state of Idaho, or fortunately in the state of Idaho, however you'd like to look at it, people who are in a long-term rental situation have all the rights in the world, and you can't do anything about it. So if there's a noise complaint, well, you'll get to have that same noise complaint next Friday when they do the same thing all over again. I think that if we just if we just keep to the restrictions that are on the board, allow the people who have short-term rentals to continue to have them, but make sure that everybody complies, that we hire this third party to come in and make sure that everybody is compliant, I think that we're on the right track. And then in a few years, let's see if there's any issues, we can address them then. But to restrict it now, as we're kind of almost going into a recession, perhaps, I think it's really going to hurt our community and all the people that work downtown that are employed, because those people staying in the short-term rentals, they're going to go spend their money, and if we don't have as many, then they won't really have a job. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Courtney? And then next is Rick Carr.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members, and my respect and greetings to each of you. I want to thank you all for your dedicated service to all this important cause. A bit of history on my part is I've been here for 46 years, and I raised our kids in the Garden District. My husband is a fourth generation native to the area, and we now live in his grandparents' house, who have passed, and it's about half a mile away from the Garden District. 4 years ago, we sold our commercial building that we used as our retirement monies and invested in an old 1914 multi-unit home that has 3 separate apartments that we found in a rundown condition from a previous long-term rentals for many years, that is also now located in the Garden District. We improved and renovated each apartment with 2 long-term rentals set with reasonable rents, one with which my husband's mother lives in, and one bedroom STR. We have parking in back. We have consistently followed all codes of city license since the start. We've established relationships with neighbors. We've had no complaints, and being a shared home, we're carefully choosing tenants that help, and I've held on to a 5-star rating during an operation of this SDR. We've poured our heart and souls into this committed investment, and with my husband, he had to quit his occupation recently and is a cancer survivor. Our rentals, especially the SDR, we rely upon as our sole means of income. That said, we support the need for the codes to be enforced with the growth in our beloved community. It's devastating for us to think these changes, especially limiting permits to the lottery for those of us who have existing permits and legitimate STRs, that we may now lose part of our economic and security and well-being. The existing rules need stronger code enforcement. As a longtime resident, even for those who are not, I believe compliant ST owners contribute positively to the community and are truly invested in maintaining its integrity. We provide an awesome service in addition to adding to local businesses and the city's economy, whereas the city has not been reliable in following up on its complaints and non-compliant STR operations who may be causing the problems. I trust in all earnest respect of your position as city council members that you'll be careful in our consideration. We appreciate the opportunity to express how much we love our community and how our very own livelihood depends on it. We're counting on and hope you will first enforce the current rules. I recommend the STR Commission to help enforce this potential ordinance amendments to comply with Idaho State and protect our property rights. It can best accommodate and preserve the growing changes that will help maintain the positive impact the STR industry provides, one in which we truly desire and hope to remain to belong to. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Carr. Next is Barb Krumtacker. Rick. Okay, next is Barb. And after Barb is Phyllis Leon Cavallo. Go ahead.
Okay. I was born in Farragut, so I guess I'm about as local as you could get. And I live in my grandparents' house on Lakeside. And on each end of the blocks are Airbnbs. And the concerns I have about them is in the winter when it snows, no one shovels. I guess they don't know they're supposed to, or I don't know how that works, but it's not happening. And the other thing is that they don't just park all the way up and down the street so no one else can park, but they also bring their huge boats and their other kinds of RVs and other kinds of vehicles that they think they need to bring with them, and then it blocks off more places. And then when they disconnect from those and take off in their vehicle, and then they come back and somebody's parked where they need to hook up their boat or whatever, then they have to start knocking on all the doors in the neighborhood to try to find out whose car that is so they can get their boat out. And I just would prefer to not have so many of them. There's 6 houses on my side of the street, 2 of them Airbnbs, and it doesn't seem that's necessary. And if those weren't Airbnbs making people lots of money, perhaps people that work in those restaurants that can't afford to find a place to live would be able to rent them, and we wouldn't have these shortages of labor that we have because no one can afford to live here. And those are my concerns.
Thank you. Phyllis? Next is Jen.
Phyllis Leon Cavallo. I'm here to talk about something that has not been mentioned yet in talking about the short-term rentals, and that is gated communities. I live in a very small gated community. There's 40 homes. The short-term rental is directly across the street from me. It was purchased in 2021. Before any possession was taken of the house, they used the MLS pictures to put that home both on Airbnb and Vrbo. It began being rented in August. It was not permitted until 2022. Being in a gated community, all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the paper, and all of you real estate people here, you know that gated community, privacy, security, peace of mind, quiet, all of these things go with that. However, when this particular home was permitted to be a short-term rental, all of a sudden, our gate codes were 100% negated. We may have 3 different groups per week. They and all their friends that they're having over within the Coeur d'Alene, Washington, Montana area. Our gate codes are non-existent for us anymore. We don't know who to expect in the neighborhood. And this is why we all bought it. So basically, by permitting this one house, you have denied 39 other residents of what they signed on for, which is not real good. I'm not going to go into that because the lady before me went into all the problems that come with parking, noise, etc. I do agree that you definitely need to have a third party hired to follow this up. People that are in real estate now and own these things, I would not want them as the quote-unquote committee. You were right in saying we don't have any options. When things happen, I can't call Vrbo, I can't call Airbnb because I don't know which platform that particular resident, that particular guest rented from. Both of them, Vrbo and Airbnb, they want to know when there's violations, if you will. When I call the owner, keep in mind, the owner of the property doesn't live in Idaho. This was their 3rd short-term rental, so basically they've got hotels. One was in Vancouver, Washington, one was in Bend, Oregon, and the third one was here. And calling him just gets, oh no, they're doing fine. And so that doesn't work. And there's no one up to this point. I do agree that there needs to be someone handling it. One final point. You talked about the unpermitted and the dollars that were out there. This particular VRBO that was never lived in it by the owners took the homestead exemption for 2021. So how many of these other short-term rentals are claiming that $125,000 homestead exemption?
Thank you.
James
James
Quick
Miller?
suggestion, so this doesn't come up again in discussion.
Well-
Go to your HOA. We need
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
We have, and
we're, at this
Instead of
point,
looking at the STRs.
at this point, we're good.
Yes, we've already changed the CCNR.
Yeah, we've already
so there's
gone
no
to
more.
Idaho, but you need to look at gated communities as kind of off limits.
James Miller, and then next is Elton John Bain, correct?
My name is James Miller. I reside at 3725 East Sky Harbor Drive in Fort Wayne, and I've been a resident there for over 20 years. You do understand that the Title 67 doesn't permit city to restrict unnecessarily the short-term rentals. However, we may implement reasonable regulations, and that's what I'm here to recommend to you. In the Armstrong Park area, on my block, we have 3 current VRBOs, and 3 are being added to a 1-block area within the next year. So within a 300-foot area, we're subject to over 6 VRBOs. This has been quite an issue for us as far as the noise, parking, and trash concerns, because most of these people come up here for, again, a short-term period, and they're here to let loose, have parties, and are not necessarily concerned with any viability of the neighborhood. My recommendation is to help alleviate some of this is to, again, some of the things that have been brought up by staff, and excuse me for reiterating those. We need to require off-street parking, at least 1 space required per bedroom. People are parking in the streets. That's becoming a problem for our emergency services people that have to interact on those streets because people are parking on both sides of the streets. And in a number of areas, we have very small access. Number 2, limit the occupancy numbers, two per bedroom with a maximum of 10. Some of these people are having their parties. We've had experience with a house across the street from me that had 20 people staying. These people are allowing their party members to remain in the house, and of course, those people have no consideration for property owners as well. I'm in total agreement with establishing a fine process for non-compliance and noise abatement, and hiring an enforcement officer to monitor compliance and address these issues. These people are making a ton of money on those. The house across the street from me currently rents at $1,000 a night, and they're booked up the entire summer months. They can certainly afford to pay for an increase in their permit process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Elton, and next would be Kara Biedler.
I'm a resident in the same neighborhood Jim is, and I want to offer maybe a reference point for staff to look at if you want a comparison to watch the deterioration of neighborhoods. Go to South Lake Tahoe, California, and watch the deterioration, the chaos that ensued when there was virtually no regulation of short-term rentals. It's a specific example I direct you to. I lived there for 20 years and I watched it happen. and I don't want to see it happen to Coeur d'Alene. No one wants to strip away your right to earn a living or supplementary incomes. But I think there should be some form of governmental, in basically regulation, monitoring, enforcement, because without that, you have what may very well be presenting it as a total industry. Why not have somebody who buys 5, 10, 15 homes? And if you think that's not happening, you're wrong. It absolutely is. Then you essentially have a hotel owner who inserts small to medium-sized hotels into what I want to cherish as my neighborhood. I'm watching it happen, and it doesn't make me very happy. And it makes me truly very sad to watch it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Kara, and next is Jim Volk.
Hello, my name is Kara Beidler, and I am a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids, ages 13 and 10. My family has been residents in Coeur d'Alene since 2014. We were able to purchase a second home in the Riverstone area to use as a short-term rental as a second source of income for our family. This has allowed me to stay involved with my kids on a daily basis and continue to be involved in my community. As a high school volleyball coach, Coeur d'Alene High School, go Vikings. My family relies on this income, and I work hard to maintain a 5-star rating for our short-term rental. The reason I chose a short-term rental rather than a long-term rental was to keep our property in pristine condition and allow me to closely manage the renters staying at our property. Every time I rent my property, I evaluate the renter. Do they adhere to the house and community rules? Are they clean, and do I want to rent them again? This process encourages renters to act appropriately and allows owners to maintain our properties tastefully and functionally. The majority of my renters are repeat customers who enjoy a quiet neighborhood in Coeur d'Alene. My recommendation is to focus on bringing non-permitted short-term rentals into compliance and increasing fines for violators. I support the 2-night minimum stay requirement as it limits the amount of turnover, limiting the number of non-resident, and also limiting the number of non-resident owners, as many of us who are residents and own short-term rentals are putting the income back into the city. I also do not support the idea of a lottery system. I do think the city should first exhaust the method of disbanding current illegally run or non-compliant short-term rentals. Looking at the regulations that have been proposed and the additional permitting, I also am hoping that the planning committee can look at data that shows us, the community, the benefits of adding these additional, very heavy-handed and stringent regulations. Can we see data showing that these regulations will actually address the concerns that have been raised? I urge you, City Council, to not pass such a heavy-handed and expensive set of detrimental changes to the current City of Coeur d'Alene short-term rental ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Volk. Next is Angela Greenleaf. Tell the last name, I'm sorry.
Good day, and thank you for your time and taking public comment on the STR issues that are affecting our community neighborhoods. I feel like this is our last best chance moving forward to put some common sense guardrails in place that protect all our collective rights. With every pro and con issue, I always feel like there's a common thread that we can all agree upon. And when it comes to property rights, we can all agree upon that. The great state of Idaho affords us all property right protection from undue government oversight. Idaho state code clearly states that it prohibits prohibiting STRs from operating. Secondly, we can all agree that the fact that STRs are not going anywhere anytime soon. This is no longer a zoning, owner-occupied issue. The issue before us now is regulation. State code also says any city and or county can apply restrictions on STRs for neighborhoods with regard to public health and safety, protect the general welfare of our communities, protect the integrity of neighborhoods. The integrity of our community neighborhoods is paramount. because it is the fabric that makes up our fair city. After reading the staff recommendations, I believe the recommendations are sound and practical. I also firmly believe that no one or two items of recommendations keep the safety, general welfare, and integrity of neighborhoods intact. Collectively, they address most all concerns for neighbors and neighborhoods. Having a cap on how many STRs are available makes sense on how many STRs can operate and be well managed. When the number of applicants is more than the allowable permits, the lottery system is used. Only so many STRs per block neighborhood. This will help to keep the integrity of any given neighborhood intact. Having a third-party compliance company that monitor code violations with a hotline, so all comments and complaints are on file in one central database. No other way to get the big picture of how STRs are affecting our city. One permit per owner. This would help with the housing crisis. The property owners have the opportunity to do something positive for our community by helping to ease the crisis of becoming an LTR, long-term rental. As with any business or commercial venture in Idaho, and make no mistake, STRs are a for-profit commercial enterprise. One has to have an umbrella general liability policy in place, work comp for anyone working on or maintaining the property, third-party site inspection for fire safety, building codes. I would add that while current code states no visible signage saying that property is an STR needs to change, I believe for the safety of all neighborhoods, they need to know where the STRs are located in their respective neighborhoods. Signage could be a simple Lake City STR. We have the right to know where commercial business enterprises are located in our residential zone neighborhood. The parking issue, no on-street parking allowed. The 14-day exemption, in my opinion, needs to be. Thank you very much for your time. I would just lastly say, we look to you, our city council, to do the right thing for our community of neighbors and neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela? And next is Jan Marie.
Hi, I'm Angela Gutierrez. I own an Airbnb for the last 4 years, and I do not agree with the lottery process at all. I fear that for the last 4 years, we have dutifully renewed our permits, we have posted the permit online, we have not had a single complaint with our residents, and we use it as a source of income. In our current home that we're living in, once our children have moved out, we are lowered out to a lower level, and that is how we welcome cities, people to our city. This being said, a lot of people have the same sentiments that this is our income, this is our neighborhood. I do not agree that you should have more than one Airbnb in the same block. I heard from the Garden District, we have several friends that live down there, it is rather a nuisance, and there is no parking, and as even Councilmember Cook had said yourself, you are a victim of that as well. So you need to find a solution to limit the Airbnbs on one city block, and also give us the opportunity as a compliant STR permit holder to have a renewal next month next year without any protection. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jan Marie, and next is Sarah Grenfell.
Hi, my name is Jan Marie. Thanks for the opportunity to address you today. As a 45-year Coeur d'Alene resident, my family moved here back in '77 and bought a resort on the lake. I've worked in the hospitality industry for my first 20 years of my career. And we do own a short-term rental, but we are owner-occupied. And that is, I am not against short-term rentals. I think it's awesome. I rent them when I go places. But if you're an owner-occupied, you are there. You are seeing what's going on, and you're in control of it. I love the staff recommendations of what's going on. I think, first of all, you need to enforce, which is our big problem, is enforcing what you currently have on the books. The buffer, that's amazing. I'm looking at probably maybe 25% per block, which is, we have 8 homes in our block. Maybe 2 of those could be just short-term rentals. Currently, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, with 2 more coming. I mean, the project's in the works. 1-year permit, off-street parking, that is a big issue when it comes to leaf pickup, snow removal. There's no place to park. And then when we want to have our families over, there's no parking, because directly across from us is a huge home that we've had 12 to 13 cars at one time because it's great for a bachelor party or a bachelorette party or a wedding party or whatever. A couple of things I want to add to your list of the signage is one, I think everybody has a right to know where a short-term rental is. And I think the permit should be on the sign out front showing it's a short-term rental. If I was looking to buy a home and I saw there were 6 out of 8 in a neighborhood, I wouldn't want to buy a home there, nor would I want to rent a home there. Egress, or the safety, I saw in one city what they did was they had a list of vetted inspectors. And we've got home inspectors that make a living here in Coeur d'Alene or in Kootenai County. Give them a little bit more work. They don't have to charge $400 to inspect your home because they're not crawling in your attics. But they're making sure that you are legal and you've followed all the rules. They could charge $100, to go in and inspect. The biggest concern that I have when it comes to that is there's 2 homes on our block that do not have egress windows. Are we gonna wait until there's a fire and a tragedy before we do something about that? And they're renting it to, 8 people, 10, however many people can fit in. 1 permit per owner, I think that's great. Let everybody have an opportunity. When you go through the list, you've got 6 short-term rentals for 1 person. Follow the money. Thank you very much. I love everything that you guys have proposed. Now let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah? Next is Linda Hill.
Hello, my name is Sarah Grenfell. I am a legal researcher, and I also am a business owner. I own Creative Direction Marketing. And I would like to point out to City Council that there are 2 different classes of STRs in the community, owner-occupied and owner-unoccupied. If this element is taken into consideration, STR issues would be cleared up rather quickly by the City Council. Owner-unoccupied short-term rental business model is an unethical business practice that many industries and people are involved in. It is essentially an unstaffed hotel that is allowing for a barrage of municipal code violations. This business model is a gray area that allows a loophole for individuals and entities to buy entire communities and turn them into de facto hotel districts. It is the firm belief of the people of Coeur d'Alene that owner-unoccupied STRs are operating de facto hotel districts in our residential neighborhoods. Owner-unoccupied STRs do not benefit the neighborhood integrity or promote public safety, health, and welfare. I would also like to point out that the owner-unoccupied STRs are typically 2nd and 3rd homes that are bought by the first owners of a STR and many business conglomerates. These unoccupied STR business owners and residential communities are pricing out and driving out local buyers and local renters. The only way to stop this for-profit business model from destroying neighborhood integrity and consuming available local housing is by implementing standards that unoccupied owners have to comply with, by perhaps capping the number of permits for unoccupied short-term rentals and make them register and perhaps be overseen by a local property management company to make sure that they are in compliance with city code. According to a New York Times article, I quote, STR platforms like Airbnb are essentially a glorified Craigslist where anyone can host or stay. An unchecked balance of these platforms by cities and the platforms themselves attract a predatory criminal element into neighborhoods for partygoers, drug dealers, human and sex traffickers. Will it take one of our children to go missing in order for us to realize that we allowed this corrupt element in our neighborhoods? The districts below Midtown are full of families with school-aged children, and many of these cities' public schools and daycares are below Harrison. Idaho state law says that if you are a sex offender visiting Idaho after 2 days, you must register with the local sheriff department. Unoccupied short-term rentals increase the likelihood of sex and human trafficking offenses taking place in the neighborhood. Will it take one of our children to go missing in order for us to realize that we allowed this corrupt element into our neighborhoods? I believe that the city and the city should hold these platforms accountable for our public and safety welfare, and I believe that STRs that are unoccupied should come into compliance with Idaho state sex offender laws. That they should not be around in a certain proximity of schools and daycares. I'm a mom, I have 3 children, and many people do. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine Mack. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm legally blind, so I'm kind of like, okay, we're right here by the mic. Okay. I am a local Coeur d'Alenean for 15 years with my family. My husband is born and raised. I have 5 children. I homeschool all of my children. We own and operate an SDR just 3 blocks from our house, so we're downtown. Our SDR is downtown, we're downtown. So I have a vested interest in keeping these neighborhoods safe, healthy, family first. So whatever policies come down, I advocate we need to support family life. So part of that is actually STRs. Families, it's not safe for families who are traveling, for example, to rent 2 hotel rooms to fit all the family members. And plus, you know, crying babies, we might annoy people in the hotel, right? Families rent STR houses because you can cook for a lot of people. Okay, and they're going to bed on time and things like that. Our house is locally managed, and I think that's huge. So I advocate local ownership. Coeur d'Alene residents should be allowed to own and operate STRs. We have a desire to keep our neighborhoods safe. So if we live here, it seems right that we should be allowed to own and operate an STR. Our family personally is struggling with the rising costs of living here. So there's inflation, but there's just general cost of living. Also because we are a resort town. Well, we would like to stay local. Owning an STR helps us support local businesses, our family. So we talked about how the STR helps people who clean and people who mow the lawn and things like that. Well, it also helps those of us locals who own the STR. My family can shop at Pilgrims. We can afford dance lessons for the children. We can afford to take them horseback riding, and I can afford their music lessons. Okay, but if we don't have this income, and I being legally blind, it's very difficult to go out and get a job outside the home. I would no longer be able to homeschool my children or offer to them any of those wonderful opportunities. I'm supporting local businesses every time I do that. So there is that aspect of it that I just wanted to add to the overall picture. We can't afford to operate our STR as a long-term rental unit. We can't afford the home in that way. And we wouldn't be able to go on field trips. We wouldn't be able to afford education materials. We would be eating rice and beans by staying local. So our other option is to not be local, to leave Coeur d'Alene, this beautiful home of ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Vernon is neutral and does not wish to testify. Tom and Linda Thompson.
Oh, pass. Pass.
Okay. Catherine Urchin. I'm sure I didn't say that right.
Kathy Evian?
Kathy Urchin, sorry. And then next is Lee Moyer.
Don't let your neighborhood disappear. Keep Coeur d'Alene neighborhoods first. Let's come together to solve the problems created by the proliferation of commercial short-term rentals in our area. Thank you for addressing the short-term rental regulations, everyone, and the enforcements. I am most grateful for all of your attention to this ordinance. 2 years ago, I asked the City Council to have a moratorium of all new short-term rentals. This did not happen, and now there are twice as many short-term rentals. Safety and stability of our neighborhoods and the quality of life for Coeur d'Alene residents is most important now. I would like to say that I agree with the buffer zone as far as having so many short-term rentals in a block area. I live in the Sanders Beach area. I would also like to see a company take over the regulations and the enforcements. What more can we do? What do short-term rentals really contribute to our neighborhoods? And that's all I can say is please keep our neighborhoods first. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Moyer, and next is Jeff Daly.
Lee Moyer, 301 South 16th, Sanders Beach. Owner of a vested, I want to emphasize the term vested vacation rental. I just have a couple of quick questions for the city attorney, if you could address them.
I'm legal counsel for the city. I don't give you legal advice.
I just would wish if you could answer a couple of questions, being that you represent the city. If this ordinance is passed, whether it's March, a year from now, whatever, can it be repealed?
Any ordinance can be repealed.
So if there was a legal challenge, and it took several years to either invalidate this ordinance or not, we could probably get a new council and it could be repealed, correct?
That is correct.
During that time, would the codes that are in effect today be in effect before the court's rules? So in other words, everything that's going on today as far as vacation rentals would be, you would be vested to that until the courts overturn this ordinance. Am I correct on that or not? So
Well, the ordinance in effect will remain in effect unless the court were to suspend the operation. But there is no vesting when you're dealing with permits that are valid for 1 year. That's not a vested interest, except for the 1 year that the permit is valid.
I understand that, but if there's a challenge and it takes several years at the Idaho court level, then are we, the people that are wearing red in here, or other people that have vacation rentals, are they under the rules that we have today? In other words, not this 300 feet or get slammed a misdemeanor or pay a $3,000 fine. If that hasn't been ruled on, then I should be under the old ordinance or codes, land development.
If council passes any amendments or passes a new code, that would be the code that is in effect, even if there's a legal challenge to it, unless a court were to issue an injunction to prevent the enforcement of the new code.
Okay. I thank you for answering those questions.
Jeff? Daly? Okay. Bob, Sandy, Linderman? Okay. Nick Schreiner? Spin things along a bit. Jenna Hart?
I wasn't signed
I
up.
guess we outweighted some of them.
No, I wasn't signed up to speak. I read the paper.
You know what, and that's on there, I'm sorry.
No, not a problem.
Well, shoot. Next is Tom Torgerson.
Had to leave.
Is he?
He had to leave, Mayor.
Couldn't even, we outweighted him. Stephen Smith. Stacy Blair. David Schmidt.
I just ask who still wants to talk.
Sharda Bauer. Glenn Douglas.
No comment.
Oh, man. Well, they didn't want to talk anyway. I can read that one. Dre. Is there a Dre in here? D-R-A-Y? Okay. Sue Dubois does not wish to speak, is in favor. Actually, there's really nothing to be in favor or opposed yet. This is all still just discussion.
Thank you.
David Schlatzi's, I know I murdered that. David? Next would be Cameron Mapra.
Mr. Mayor, people of City Council, that's actually not the worst butchering of my name, so
Please share it with me.
I'm David Schlachtis.
Thank you.
And I live in the Sanders Beach area, so thank you all for listening to us and hearing both sides of this important issue. If you look at my house, the two houses on either side of me, and then the three houses behind me in the alley, 6 homes, 3 are Airbnbs, all 3 are unoccupied, owner unoccupied Airbnbs, so 50%. If you look at my block, there's 13 homes, there's now 6 Airbnbs, only 1 is owner occupied. So we're at that 45%. So our area in particular is being very hard hit. The issues that you face are actually pretty nuanced, right? And a lot of people have said, well, if there's a loud party, we want to hear about it. We don't have loud parties, but I have neighbors. Well, first off, the person next to me, south of me, they have an Airbnb which sleeps 14. So yes, I do have issues. I have issues of 3, 4, and 5 cars being, parking in front of me, and I don't have a vehicle, an area where I can make a phone call and someone's going to do something about it. The people that own the Airbnbs are very nice. I don't want to have them have the inability to have Airbnbs and an income stream. The people that run the property management companies are very nice, but no one's doing anything, right? So who am I going to call at 10 o'clock at night when that party's supposed to be over? Who am I going to call at 4 in the morning when we've literally had to go outside and say, hey, we work. You guys need to stop, be quiet, and take it inside. This has happened repeatedly, not just once in the last 3 or 4 years. We have problems with garbage. They're very nice. They take all the garbage out. And when their garbage can is full, they go put it in our garbage can. We have problems with, I think about a month ago, I caught someone urinating outside, right? One of my neighbors has had people vomiting. So these are all nuanced issues. You don't have big raging parties. But we do have the issue, as one other person said, of them bringing their boats and now no one can park anywhere in that area. I do support the city's ideas, the planning commission, what they have come up with in terms of ideas. If you're running a great Airbnb and you've got one here in town, you don't have to worry about being fined because you're vetting the people. You're vetting to make sure that the people that are there are going to be good and responsible. But like I said, on our block we have 5 alone that are unowner occupied. No one is vetting them. So I do think that having a commission that has both people that own them and people that don't own them is a really good idea. And I support the other ideas as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Cameron?
Yeah, thank you.
And then next is Jesse Sudo.
So I have a STR. I've had it from day one of its existence and actually built it from the ground up. I bought my first house in Coeur d'Alene in 2000 on 4 grounds. Tony Burns made a deal with me in 2003 to buy it for Lake City Development Corp. It's not what he had said it was going to be today. It's a house. It's a lot more expensive house. I remember buying that house for $55 grand in 2000. I sold it for $85 in 2003. I thought I was making a lot of money. Because in 2003, it was still a dead market. Things are changing. I mean, I think it really goes back to an issue of where you can live, right? These numbers that Kelly Setter gave me back in 2020 when I started building Linden Coffee, there was 135 permits. So that meant that in 17, when you guys said, yes, we're gonna permit this, we're gonna allow this, thank you for doing that. In 16, it was illegal, I noticed that, so it was illegal in 16. But in 17, you let it. So then in 2020, when I was building over on Linden, there was 135 permits pulled. So someone wasn't doing their job. I think we should punt this. This whole STR thing, we need to punt it for another year. Because what we've had is the biggest real estate fiasco happen in the last couple of years. And anybody that's cashed out in the last 2 years is part of the problem. We're not talking about STRs. We're talking about.
Please address the mic.
What?
Just face forward.
So I'm sorry, so we're talking about people that have cashed out on their real estate deals. So that has nothing to do with STRs in downtown Coeur d'Alene, south of the freeway. I mean, come on, let's look at this. How many of you guys have an STR? How many city employees have an STR? We've heard the people that are trying to make a living. So 2021, 235, 2022, 450 permits this month. I mean, you've got it. You got our attention. And we are coming in for permits. I was day one permitted, but we're coming in for permits. So you've done your job. You have done a great job. Now let's punt it. Because now we're gonna get into a legal battle, right? Because we're gonna fight this. Because you're coming after our livelihood.
Yes.
And we are doing everything by the book. And so I think and I don't like the idea of hiring a company. We have no numbers. Please provide us with numbers before you even bring this up. I want to know what this costs. Everybody does. If it's $500 grand to hire this company to do this, that's bad business. Be responsible, please.
Jesse? Next is Jim Loper.
Good afternoon, City Council members. Thank you for taking the time to hear from the public on this important issue. My name is Jim Loper. My wife and I own a 4-bedroom downtown home at 115 East Foster that is professionally managed as an STR through VRBO by a local elementary school teacher who supplements her income. We accommodate larger families. They're celebrating weddings, anniversaries, and birthdays, and they're people who cannot reasonably afford to stay in 2 to 4 hotel rooms for their families due to financial considerations. It's just not practical. We recently made a $30,000 investment to convert our garage to a game room and employed a resident carpenter and electrician to build it out. We also spent $6,000 to install air conditioning. We upgraded our house. And why did we do that? Because we knew that that's what we needed to attract short-term rentals. Our guests walk to Midtown and Sherman to eat and shop. They visit galleries. They enjoy lake activities, and they enjoy the local theme parks. They contribute greatly to the CDA economy. The $110 million figure is mind-boggling, but that's true. We have received no complaints about our guests. Like most STR operators, we strive for great ratings, and we've made a large investment of time, money, and energy to make our home attractive to STR guests. We know our neighbors on a first-name basis, and we often stop to chat. Our home, we believe, is actually an improvement to the integrity of our neighborhood. I am pleased that the owner-occupied requirement is off the table. However, I continue to have very serious concerns about the recent recommendations. Planners have benchmarked and borrowed from the most restrictive provisions from left coast cities to form a smorgasbord of really foul-tasting recommendations. While there is an acknowledgement for the need for a balanced approach, the recommendations and the topics that we've heard today to consider seem anything but balanced. I've seen anecdotes of wild parties and disturbances in the press, but that's not been my experience. And I have not seen any statistics that support any of the claims about noise, parking, traffic, disturbances, or trash by permitted STRs. We are being asked to take it on faith that permitted STRs disproportionately create issues. If such issues exist, then to paraphrase Jerry Maguire, city planners, show us the data. If issues in fact do exist, after the data proves it, then the next step before creating new, more restrictive rules should be to enforce existing rules, and then, if necessary, examine why enforcement of those rules is still insufficient. Right now, enforcement is non-existent. That's readily acknowledged. The existing rules need to be enforced. Only after we have enforcement of the existing rules and an evaluation of the effectiveness of enforcement should any new restrictions be considered. I've reviewed the city planner's recommendations involving saturation, overall caps, lotteries, and proximity or buffer restrictions. Unfortunately, this forum doesn't allow me the time to speak further about those. I will send a letter about my thoughts around those. I do appreciate your time, but I think that when you talk about 1.85 or 8.6, 1.86% of STRs being the saturation level, it's really hard for me to believe that that is creating any real significant issues. If it is, we need to see that data. Thank you.
Jesse?
Heads up, screen's coming out.
And then next is Lisa. That starts WILL. Lisa, are you here? Welcome, Jesse.
Hello, City Council members. Thank you for inviting us all today. My wife and I own and operate one short-term rental. It's a single-family home, and we have a variety of guests that come. We've never had anyone from the police visit. We've never had a neighbor complaint. It's on our street, and we know all of our neighbors by name. We think it's really important to maintain a good relationship with our neighbors. They can tell us if anything's going wrong. We all have our direct phone number. The types of people that come to visit are generally looking to move to the area and want a place to stay for typically more than 3 days, closer to a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's people coming into town to come and visit maybe a newborn grandson. It's people coming into town, like this last summer, to rent it out for a month because they're local, they don't live here anymore, but they have a lot of family in the area that they want to visit. I think this is a really good opportunity to regulate, and I'm very pro-regulation. I just want it to be done in the right way. What I'm seeing right now with short-term rental market in general is that it appears that a lot of bookings are beginning to slow down, and in a lot of ways, we're a little late for regulation in the sense that I don't trust that the timing is necessarily responding to when the problem occurred, because there's typically a lagging indicator for permits. So say that you have 900 operating STRs right now, and you've got permits coming in by the day, which I'm sure you do. You're not going to see if any of those are actually still in business until about 6 months to a year later. And so by making decisions now based on past data, I think that we're using a bad data set to predict the path of these. I know that there's no way that 1,500 Airbnbs can be profitable in Coeur d'Alene because I don't think the demand is there. But the demand is there for some. And so I think the best course of action is to enforce regulation to make sure that the unregulated ones become regulated, have fire extinguishers, have parking plans, all the required things today. By focusing on compliance of those non-compliant ones, that gives existing owners a chance to determine whether or not they want to invest in more, whether they should have more, whether they should shut down their current one. As the previous speaker said, it can take, you don't just flip a switch and turn these on. It can be $20,000, $30,000 and more in repairs, in renovations, supporting local contractors, supporting local businesses to spin one up. So the lottery option that renews year by year doesn't give anyone in the local real estate market the confidence to invest in Coeur d'Alene, to support our local tradesmen, to support our local cleaners. I honestly don't think that the market is going to bear very many more short-term rentals to be profitable, so I think you're going to see a large downtick. So I just discourage any knee-jerk reactions, any blanket policies, and a phased approach is going to be the most prudent and the most effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd Butler. And then Lisa.
Sarah goes up.
Lisa Z. Welcome, Todd.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up maybe for consideration some other options that haven't been looked at. One of the one of the case studies you had on your website was from San Diego that had a tiered system. And maybe there's not just one type of permit that fits all. One thought that I had was perhaps the ability to limit a permit until after you were a resident of that property for 3 to 5 years. What something like that might do is it would keep people from building real estate just as a business, as a short-term rental. It might also limit people from buying from out of state just as an investment property where they're not invested in the community. It would also give the ability for current owners to just prove that they have 3 to 5 years of ownership of this prior to issuing a permit to them. If somebody wanted to buy long-term, where they wanted to use it as short-term rental, if they were limited to that permit in the first 3 to 5 years, that would open up long-term rentals, which would help some of our housing needs. And it would really give a higher priority to the permits for existing homeowners and people in our community. Another idea that I had in that tiered system came up from discussion today, which would maybe be an additional permit choice for a 7-day minimum or a 14-day maximum consecutive use, where a person could, for like Ironman, come in and take out an individual permit for that length of time, or 2 permits if they wanted to do a 14-day, if it was a 7-day limit. And maybe that tiered approach could, a person, any resident could do that up to 4 times a year or something like that, where they're not trying to do it as a full-time business, but take advantage of their asset that they have. That would give somebody like me the chance to say, hey, I want to go see a different part of the world for a month. Why don't I could offset that cost by putting my house in a desirable neighborhood up for a short-term rental if there was a means in place to do that. In summary, I'm not in favor of the buffer zones or caps or limitations on that. I live in a neighborhood where I've lived there for 30 years. David, who spoke earlier, is my neighborhood. I've seen a couple other people from my street. In the first 25 years, there was no change. And from where I live and work, I can see probably 25 new homes on my street alone, probably 12 or 14 on my block alone. And as David mentioned earlier, there are 3, 4, 5 of those are short-term rentals. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa? Next would be, let's see, are the Tatums wishing to testify?
No.
Okay. Eric Mack would be next. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Z. I also am a member of the Coeur d'Alene Vacation Rental Alliance. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out today, showing their deep interest in our community. We've all listened to everyone's concerns. There are concerns on each side. We're all compassionate to the needs of our neighbors. We highly value protecting Coeur d'Alene's neighborhood integrity. We are deeply invested in this community. We support the current ordinance and believe the city should enforce the ordinance as it stands. Changes to the ordinance in the future cannot infringe on property rights and must be in line with current Idaho state law. Vacation rentals contribute significantly to the local economy and protect local jobs. Again, our solution is a local short-term rental commission that will be filled with volunteers. We are all volunteering ourselves to be part of this, with residents, business owners, homeowners who have a vested interest and can report directly to the city council rather than our city spending local tax dollars to hire an outside enforcement agency which has no understanding of local context and needs. City council has already stated that our budget is tight, so where is this money going to come from? Our desire is to come together, working as a community, to help the city of Coeur d'Alene flourish. We want the same resolution: happy neighbors, clean and safe neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric? Next is Brian Oberholzer. Brian? Then that would be Matt Klepper. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Eric Mack. I am a math professor down at our local college. I have been a long-term, I was born here. It's hard to live here and be a public servant. It's hard to live on college salary. Until like 5 years ago, the college was frequently doing budget holdbacks where they wouldn't give us our annual step allowance for cost of living. I finally found a way to make ends meet for my family when, after years of blood, sweat, and tears of flipping houses and fixing them up and selling them, I had enough money to buy a second one, just barely. And so my wife spoke earlier, we have a short-term rental 3 blocks away from our house. And it lets us finally do the things that we need to do for our family, finally take care of our 5 kids. The mere threat of this has put my house on the market, because honestly, if you guys pass this in January and 3 months later, 100 homes go on the market at once, the market's trashed, more than it already is trashed. And I won't be able to get out what I put into it. And I will leave this town. And it will be the fault of this decision. And this decision has already caused a lot of damage. The economy is already hurting. Whatever the case, 5 years have let this mature as we took a soft hand. It needs to have a soft path out of it too. Yeah, there's probably too many. Yeah, some of it will probably self-correct. Yeah, maybe we should get the people who have 5, 6 and live out of state off the books. But the lottery system that punishes the little guy like me who, I'm $10,000 in furnishings into this thing, and this is only the second summer that I got to use it. And now, what, done? With no warning? Really? It's not right. And there are a lot of people that this is a nuanced problem for. There are some people who are rich and are making a lot of money off of this. But this covers the mortgage on the extra thing. It covers the mortgage on my house, mostly. And it lets me do the normal middle class things that somebody who was not underemployed as I am as a servant to the community, as a math professor. I could probably make twice as much as I make at NIC, but I want to serve NIC. This hurts me, and it hurts other people like me.
Thank you. Matt? Next is Diane Notash.
Hi, my name's Matt Clapper, and I've been managing vacation rentals for management companies since 2014. I spent 7 years with Big Casa. Spent the last year and a half with Vacation Rental Authority down on 10th and Sherman. As an operations manager, so I get to see all of the activities that come and go. I've probably personally overseen thousands and thousands of visits to the city with various homes. We manage all the way down to Worley, all the way out to Spirit Lake, all the way around the lake. None of the homes outside of Coeur d'Alene city limits are regulated. So we have just ones just outside the city limits that don't have the same issues. But when this first started with the existing ordinance, me and a coworker would come down to and sit down on these sessions and hear about it and listen and even testify at the time, and watch them come into place, and it seemed pretty reasonable. So as soon as they were in place, we had to contact every owner within the city limits. We had to get a map out and figure out who they were, and send them the regulation. Here's how you apply for your permit. We didn't get them for them. We had them do it. And so you own your permit. So if you sell your house, you sell, your permit doesn't go with the house anyway. But and so I went and bought the fire extinguishers, and I went and laminated the floor plans, and I went and handed out neighbor notices to all the neighbors, or we mailed them. Mainly, I just went and tried to meet the people too, just to say, hey, there's an STR next door, and we got to tell you about it. And generally well received. And at the time, with Vacasa, I was, as an operations manager, we didn't have a central phone to call in and complain about. It was my cell phone. So my cell phone got called by a neighbor when there was a problem each and every time. And some of those people still have, well, I don't have that phone anymore after I left there, but I've met the neighbors even just recently, I met one who lives next door to one I used to manage. And I said, I think I still have your phone number. And he's like, it listed as like CD 101 neighbor, you know. What did it say, grumpy neighbor? I said, no, but you know, it's just, the idea is that by and large, I would get a call to go to a house and because someone was having, you know, but that was such a minor, I mean, there was so few of those. My experience is thousands and thousands and thousands of rentals. When I go to a house that I end up meeting the family that went there, 9 times out of 10, they're just here because they can't, you know, Bob's, you know, my family from Montana to Seattle, and we're all gonna meet in Coeur d'Alene, and we're gonna have our family reunion. It's just convenient. We're gonna go on the lake, we're gonna have fun. Where do we all wanna get together? To Central, you know, and it's a family-oriented affair. We have a strict no party policy. There's all kinds of stuff in effect. I think the existing regulations are great. We just need an organic enforcement and not to regulate by exception.
Thank you. Diane? And next would be Brandon Quigley. Welcome.
Hi, Mr. Mayor, City Council, thank you for holding the hearings today. I think it's really good to hear all sides and get some input on what's going on over this situation. I am a 3rd-generation resident of Coeur d'Alene. I'm a local property manager. I have managed properties since 2005. I've owned a business downtown. I've worked with the Downtown Association. I can tell you tourism is hugely important to the people in the city that are running small businesses and trying to make a living here. We have hotels, motels, short-term stay apartments, condos, and vacation rentals, all doing short-term stays. I really feel they should all be treated the same. We have same goals and issues. I would like to see the regulations address this body as a whole and not to divide us. All accommodations for housing for tourists impact the city with revenue on the bright side, and neighbors and neighboring businesses on the downside. We should work together for a common goal rather than be pitted against each other. I agree with the current permitting process. We should not punish those in compliance because we don't have a solution to non-compliance. I do have ideas for compliance. My career for 32 years was working for the State Tax Commission as a compliance officer, and that involved educating taxpayers and getting compliance to the laws. I helped with the resort tax for the county, Kootenai County, in the implementation and compliance regulations for those laws. And I can tell you the tax commission, when they were faced with non-compliance for sales tax and travel and convention tax, actually partnered with VRBO and Airbnb and some of the booking agents. And what they made an agreement was those booking companies now collect the sales tax and the travel and convention tax for all of the people that may or may not have been contributing. So I feel like there are solutions. I would recommend an impact group of concerned citizens to allow a sharing of ideas and to present to the city council. Without going into all of my ideas for improvements, I'd like to say I'd volunteer to be a part of that impact group. Compliance is absolutely attainable, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Brandon? And then Deanne Stevens?
Hi, my name is Brandon Quigley. I've lived in Coeur d'Alene for 25 years, and I have a unique perspective, maybe different than some other people. I actually own short-term rentals in multiple different states. I have personally seen and witnessed, I've gone through the process. One of the companies that I've heard mentioned today is Host Compliance. I've worked with that company and gone through and met regulations and did all of the crazy guidelines. And one of the states that I own a short-term rental in, it cost me thousands of dollars for an out-of-county, out-of-state, out-of-the-area company that doesn't live where my short-term rental is at. It's a money grab. They make you go through all these classes and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, they're not there to do anything. They're not there to enforce anything. Nobody from host compliance ever steps foot in my city or county or town where my houses are located at, and they won't hear. So it's a waste of time for everybody to even go through all that. Some of the things that have been brought up today, I've heard a lot of complaints about parking and noise ordinances. There's no way that short-term rentals could be cross-referenced with parking violations that are happening on city streets. Those are two completely different entities, and if there's parking issues that are coming up on city streets, those need to be handled by the parking division of the city. That doesn't have anything to do with short-term rentals. So if there's violations for parking or noise ordinances, the people that own the short-term rentals aren't the ones being loud. The people that are violating noise ordinances need to be held responsible for that. So whoever is the one hooting and hollering or partying or parking illegally or whatever, they need to be held responsible by the parties that enforce those code violations. My belief is the number of short-term rentals, somebody mentioned it earlier, it absolutely will be determined by the supply and the demand of the area. And bad players that aren't following the rules, the current rules and regulations, guidelines, and not, vetting their guests and doing things like that, they'll be weeded out. They will naturally just go by the way of the dodo bird by not doing things correctly. I think that the city council needs to take more of a methodical approach to short-term rental guidelines rather than what I've heard as a knee-jerk reaction going from not really enforcing the ordinances that we have now all the way to the other end of the spectrum, an extreme end. We need to gradually work toward what we already have in place and then check that status and see how we're doing maybe a few months or whatever down the road. So thanks for hearing me.
Thank you. Dan Stevens? Okay. That concludes the public comment period. You did a good job of staying on time. Wow. First of all, I want to say thank you for the respectful and positive way that you presented, whether you were supporting or opposing short-term rentals. Secondly, I want to say that some ideas relative to regulation some of the proposed ideas were excellent. I think you've given us some good fodder to think about. And there was expressed by more than one person that there was at least an implication that a decision had already been made. There is no decision whatsoever. It was the whole purpose of this discussion today, was to hear from you from both sides of the issue and to better formulate some thoughts about how we move forward. And I'm intrigued by the commission. I am intrigued by some of the other thoughts that have been provided, and I think we have some good ideas to discuss as we move forward. We certainly, there's nobody here that just wants to eliminate or take back the licenses from people who are legally licensed in short-term rentals. We recognize we are a resort city and that we will have some of those. I use those sometimes when I travel. We also want to be sure that we protect the integrity of neighborhoods. So that's been some excellent discussion. Any last thoughts from anybody else?
I thought we were going to give direction to staff. You guys need more direction, or are you good?
Well, the last slide, but our screen got taken away, was just a summation of information that we've heard. We've heard a lot of questions, a lot of answers, but we really haven't heard anything that's off the table you don't want us to research, or some things you're passionate about, keeping us on the same track. So anything that you can give us that gives us any further direction. And again, this continues the dialogue. We still have stakeholder meetings, and we will still have dialogue with the Planning Commission. But I think it's your opportunity as Council and Planning Commission to kind of bat back and forth ideas you guys want to see continuing going down the road.
I have 2 points. I don't think we can control a 2-night minimum or a 14-day exemption. I think that should just go away. My other thought is that signage is like the old Hertz car, rental car thing where you have a stamp and everybody knew you were a tourist from out of town. I don't like the idea of an STR poster on the street. I don't want to know that that house is empty some of the time. Maybe it's a Target. And I disagree with any signage. I do know that you can relocate people and send them to things like airdna.co. I saw the maps. I see how many there are out there. It's scary. So pull up your miners who mine this data and see where that house is. See how many Airbnbs are in your neighborhood. You might not want to buy on that street because there's 6 out of 10 are now Airbnbs. So there's data out there, but I don't want to see it on the street. I think they took all the budget and Hertz took all their signage off cars because that's like a big sign when you're from out of town. So I'd like to not see that. The other thing is just a parting word. I've traveled the world, I've worked the world in resorts and developments all over the world. If you've ever been to Venice, you see what happens when everything turns into rentals. There's only old people sweeping the sidewalks. There's nobody there that lives there. They're either working there or they're old people holding on to that last wonderful palace. But there's no life there. There's no little kids playing in the street. There's no actual neighborhoods. It's a walk-in museum. And that's what a lot happens when you turn over your lovely city to the non-person we don't know. And our schools are decimated. You know, we have to look at it on both sides. And I don't like Venice. I like, a city that has life and real life. How can we have real life when it's all people coming in and going out? So there's a balance, and we're going to try and hit that balance. That's our goal.
I would like to follow on with what Lynn said, and I'm glad you mentioned Venice, because I looked that up last night.
Oh, and I've lived it. I went there every year.
All about it.
Yeah, so
no one
yeah.
lives in Disneyland. Everyone loves Disneyland.
Yeah.
No one lives in Disneyland. It is not a community. Coeur d'Alene is great because we are a community. You can't call yourself a community when you have 6 out of your 10 neighbors a hotel. You can't. There's gonna have to be some regulations. We have to figure out how to do it fairly. But the way it's going now, if we just go ahead and continue with the way it is, there are going to be blocks in this city that are all vacation rentals. And like Lynn said, that is not a community. That's not a place to go to vacation. It kills the community. It stifles it. It's like cancer starving a cell. I am opposed to having any more committees. I don't want to see another committee set up to do things. You have the rules. You abide by the rules. You don't need to have a committee. I would like to see them banned in those gated communities. I don't know if we can do that or not. I think that's through your HOA, and I know HOAs have priorities over us.
That's exactly how, like she
sorry, it's not a
said,
discussion.
that's a
I
whole
appreciate
different
what you're
deal.
saying. And there's gotta have to be some way to decide if there's 5 on a block that are all next to each other, and if we don't do anything, there's gonna be 6, 7, 10 on a block. We have to do something to save a neighborhood. We have to do something to save the neighborhood. So we're gonna have to figure out who gets to keep the STRs, which means a lottery. Because we can't just tell staff to pull names out of a hat, can we? Is that fair? That's not fair. So we have to figure out what is the priority. Who gets to keep the STR? What makes a good STR? That's gonna be tough. You guys gave a lot of damn good reasons for having an STR. The math teacher, that was a great one. But we have to find something to do it. I think everyone's really good about these lazy owners. Yeah, get rid of the lazy owners. Well, what's a lazy owner? How do we tell what a lazy owner is?
It's a non-compliant
It's gonna be difficult. And there has to be some parameters given to staff. High priority, for me, would be an on-site manager. That would be a given. That's, boy, the neighbors can deal with an on-site manager like that. There's no phone calls, there's no, it's easy. Off-street parking is a great thing to have. We've talked about parking issues. I think if someone has got their permit early, you know, they were first in line, they signed up, they got the permit that day. That's a great priority. Limiting it to one per owner, that would be another way to go ahead and restrict these things. And I was gonna tell you, you know, we do have a problem here. We have affordable housing, which I think is just it's just a term. I don't think there is any, but there's also affordable rent. And we have to look at all these big pictures of all the people, you know, you have someone who comes to town and they wanna go out to eat. Where's that guy who works in that restaurant? Where's he gonna live? Where's he gonna work? He needs the only places, I don't know if having fewer STRs is gonna solve that problem or not, but again, it goes back to a sense of community. Coeur d'Alene is a community. The community makes us great. There are a lot of beautiful spots in this world where no one lives, but we live here, and we have to take care of our community. It needs to be a priority. And I gotta tell you, before 2017, we had an economy, we had tourism, we were vibrant. Having short-term rentals didn't boost or deny anything. You cannot measure that in any way because this place has been thriving as a tourist community since 1986. And that's because of that big building over there. So to say economy one way or another, people want to come here, they're still going to come here. I think it just, what comes back down to me is neighborhood, neighbors, sense of community.
Dan?
Well, I'll try to give a few concise thoughts. This won't be the final report, obviously, especially for council, but want to respond to a few things. Then I think it is important to have that outside company. For now, we need the data, and that's the first important thing. And then for the ongoing management of essentially contracting part of that out, enforcement and things, and the continued data gathering, I think that makes sense, but first we've got to have a good picture of what we've got. I don't think you can go retroactive on a law and give somebody a speeding ticket tomorrow because they were going 50 and now tomorrow we've made it a 25 zone and, you know, but I do think we have to have caps, you know, in terms of how many and maybe what that, you know, how that works out, maybe through attrition or something that kind of like a company or something, you know, going to freeze positions and you don't go in and fire somebody, but you don't rehire. And then for the areas, the lottery might make sense going forward for how many, you know, where there's not an occupied area and you want to do something. So I think there's some things to wrestle back and forth, but also like the parking, I think is a real thing. And boy, being, you know, like having a boat or something. So I think that's something, you know, looking to that community is maybe they need to say is, look, if you're going to come and rent from my place, just so you know, you can't bring your boat, you can't bring your RV. You know, maybe there'll be a cottage industry in town that'll pop up for people to go park their boats as they're traveling through or something. But, you know, I lived at 9th and Garden, 6th and Foster. There isn't room for a bunch of extra tourist boats on there. So I get that. And I think they should have to, if that's what you're going to do, then frankly, you're probably going to have to convert part of your lawn into a couple of parking spots. And when I hear 14 people, or, you know, probably too many. Maybe there ought to be only, you know, a 10-person camp or something. Otherwise, it gets into more of a hotel. And actually, I do like the idea of the, you know, the vacation rental commission, you know, like a parking commission, art commission. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I mean, it'd be appointed by mayor. There'd be different people involved and would be, you know, council liaison and things, but, so, as opposed to, you gotta keep the Dan straight sometime, because, opposed to the other Dan, I think that's a good idea, and anyway, this won't be the last 2 cents on it. Kiki?
3 things. I still have seen a lot of folks who are confused about some of the can and cannot do things. So my direction would be to ask staff to kind of delve into more of an FAQ that can be posted somewhere that's more consistent about some of the legalities. I still see people are confused. The second thing is I think we need to continue to do some more analysis on the layers. I think those color-coded layer neighborhood zones on what the real number of permitted and non-permitted is in those areas, so we can maybe take a look at the most highly affected areas differently than some others. And then I think there's, that ties into some of the new ideas that some of the folks brought up. I'd like to see those kind of pursued for legality and if they're going to be able to be worked.
Actually, Kiki, I would like to do that too, your last point. And I think that in order to come up with a solid recommendation, I would like to see Tom bring 3 people forward from his commission and 2 or 3 council people also to work with staff on some final recommendations, hearing all that was heard today from both sides. And if you're interested in doing it, I'm going to ask you to let me know. And there's no need to take a lot of time on this, but we can come forward. I don't think it's appropriate just to put the burden on staff. I think that we ought to have some appointed and elected officials play a role in formulating some recommendations to bring forth, first to planning and zoning and then to the council. Yes?
I certainly agree with what you said, Mayor, about having P&Z or city council, so people give direction to staff a little bit more, given that it's 3 o'clock, we've already been here for a while. But just my viewpoint on this is, I think a third party is the way to go. Another formal long-term commission, as a parking commission or some other commission that you want to form just to oversee all this. I don't think that's going to work. A third party, I'd like more information from staff to give us some information on, is it local, is it not here, based on how would that be enforced. I think this all comes down to enforcement. Regardless of the rules and regulation, if you don't have enforcement, I've said this many, many times about a lot of stuff that the city tries to do, we just don't have the staff nor the funds to enforce anything that might be great for the community. So I think a third party, more information on that, given to however this advisory group might be, is an important thing in how that works out, whether or not it's more regulations or not.
I want to hear more about this
Christie's.
People seem to want to do this group, and I have no idea what you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree that a lot of this seems to be about enforcement, and are we enforcing what we have in place now? So what I would like to ask staff to do is to do more of an analysis on enforcement and what's happening in other communities. And then also, I'd like to know more about the outside group. Is it a menu selection of services? We can pick this and not pick that, or you have to pay for the whole thing. I think we can have both. I'm always looking for a compromise. I actually like to see citizens involved in government, and I want them involved in a commission. What their duties would be, we can work that out. We can figure out where they play a role in this enforcement and where maybe the outside entity plays a role in it. I think the outside entity is more for data, is what I'm gathering, of where these places are. So I'd like to see a combination, so I'd like staff to really look at that. And then I'd also like to spend a little more time on the hot button issues like the off-site parking. I don't know the rules on that, if you can pave over your front lawn for more parking. I don't know. And so I want some more information on that, because people should provide more parking and get off the street.
Sarah?
I mean, I agree with a lot of the comments already that I won't repeat, but it seems like a lot of the owners that are here today are ones that are running, you know, Airbnbs that have been established for a long time, and they're doing all the rules, and so there also seems to be a fair amount of people that are either unaware or not following the rules. So I think that's a good starting point to just get back to where the rules that were already created are being followed. But I do think we have a little bit of a boundary on the lottery system or those sorts of things on limiting property rights, individual property rights. And there are a couple of important court cases that are actually, you know, happening right now that aren't decided yet in that realm. One of them being Idaho Realtors is backing a homeowner in Lava Springs. And I think that one's actually being heard today. So I think we kind of take a slow roll on this and kind of see how those play out before we kind of get in a situation where we're, you know, looking at a similar ordinance. So I would say that we kind of follow some of those things and really look at the property rights side of that argument to be careful where we land.
Always two sides to property rights.
There are always two sides.
What do you see this commission doing? I mean, what is their job? If we make the rules, why do we need a commission?
Well, I think, first of all, they can continually provide ongoing input. Maybe we want them looking at some sort of enforcement. For instance, if there is an appeal on a fine, rather than tying up the prosecutor's office with all of these ongoing complaints, we could have a citizens commission, and that's what the parking commission is. Just ideas. I'd like to explore it and see what it might look like.
Well, I think the law is black and white. You don't need a committee. And I have a lot of serious concerns about having a committee full of people who have a very high financial interest in keeping the status quo.
You could have a balanced committee. People like me, I don't even have.
Or we should have no committee.
What?
We don't have committees for people who have speeding tickets.
Well, I think that's an actual crime. We have it established just as a crime.
I want to protect our neighborhoods, and I'm afraid you guys let this thing slip. This town, just like Lynn said, the only people who can live here are going to be old people and then rich people who can afford to buy the homes and turn them into vacation rentals. That will be the city of Coeur d'Alene from Harrison south to the lake.
I agree with you. Nobody wants that. So we
But be careful of the unintended consequences of the decisions made by these bodies.
But nobody's making decisions. It's just gathering.
But they're given a lot of things saying, hey, let's go ahead, let's wait a little bit, let's wait for the court cases, let's kick the can down the road.
We're not kicking anything down the road.
I think it'd be nice to have more data, and I think we need to make a sound decision.
I need a motion for adjournment.
I so move.
Well, actually, I need a council.
I'll motion to adjourn for council.
Need a second? Second. All the council in favor, respond with aye. Aye. Opposed with nay. Motion carries.
Make a motion for the planning commission.
We have to adjourn, so we're mostly.